Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. After the main character dies, he wakes up inside of the Marvel multiverse. He starts off in the zombie multiverse, and later he'll escape it and start the breakout all over the multiverse. Will the Avengers be able to stop him? Will anybody be able to stop the Scarlet King instead of the Marvel multiverse?
The river boiled along the impact line. Something stood in it, getting taller as it stopped crouching, long and lean with a hide like broken glass that had never been polished. The head turned from side to side like a hunter. The tail cut a line through the water and left it smooth. It took a breath and spoke in a voice that grated like ungreased gears. "I hate this." It looked at the city. More of the same. Jets cut in overhead. The sound came late. Stark-level fighters, sleek and small, came hard and low, painted with a silver line along the nose. Their pilot chatter ticked in the air. A shield channel tried to lock a perimeter before the uniforms had arrived. One pilot's voice went sharp. "Target is live. Not identified. Hold formation." Otto Octavius moved before the standing forces sorted their tree. I felt the vibration of his armored legs on the nearest tower before I saw him. The superior Spider-Man armor was dark and clean. He did not use bright colors now. 4 arms moved behind his back with precision. His voice carried on private lines and public ones at once. Containment first. Non-lethal until target classification. Spiderlings, grid east and south. Avengers, respond with coordination. No improvisation. He said it calmly. He believed he was in charge. He believed authority ended events. His belief did not matter. 682 lifted one foot and placed it on the edge of the pier. The concrete sank. Its skin flexed and adjusted as if it had weighed the city and the city failed the measure. It sniffed once and turned toward Times Square because noise always draws predators. A shield squad hit the pier from the left in a clean wedge. Their armor did not flash. Someone had learned one lesson. They moved well. Their commander pointed and cut one hand low. Net rounds fired in a sheet. 682's tail rose and cut 3 nets out of the air in one motion, then slapped the last 2 away like trash. The men adjusted for a second volley without panic. The second volley never mattered. The creature took 2 steps and hit them with a sweep across the knees. The line fell. One got back up. He had good breath control. He went down again when his visor filled with salt water. Otto met the thing at the water's edge. He bolted in bright and fast. He used the 4 arms to pin, then to stab, then to pin again. The style was neat. He aimed for joints. He aimed for eyes. He did not go for theatrics. He tried to cut the problem to exact shape on the first pass. 682 moved with a patience that spoke of long boredom and anger that had no end. It let him strike home once across the eye and watched the cut close. It let him drive a spike into the forearm and watched the flesh eat the metal. It spoke into his ear with a tone that did not rise. "I hate you." Otto answered through clenched teeth, focused and measured. "The feeling is mutual." He hit a panel key loud enough for me to hear it. "Deploy inhibitor foam, Mark Theta. Civilian evacuation priority." White Towers 5 blocks north and 4 blocks south opened and spat foam in sheets. The foam fell with steady weight. 682 let the first seconds cover its head. Then its head rose out of it slick and clean with a hide that had shifted to repel thick liquid. The foam slid away. It shook once and the streets cleared for 10 meters. The Avengers arrived in a rough spread. This team was a mix suited to this world's politics. Stark's armor in this era was sleek and hostile. He had a smile when he wanted it. He did not waste it today. Captain America looked at Otto with a steady jaw and did not salute him. He did not fight him either. Thor's hammer turned slow above his hand. Black Widow's eyes did not leave the target. Hawkeye's mouth tightened. Hulk was absent by necessity in this world. That was fortunate for this city and irrelevant for this fight. They feigned in around 682 to box it. It did not need a box. It needed activity. I watched Otto and Stark disagree without wasting words they would not share in public. I watched Captain America pick a lane without asking for one. I watched Thor ask nothing because he did not ask. He acted. He hurled his hammer. The blow landed true against the side of 682's head. The scale did not split. The body turned. Thor's eyes narrowed. He hit again. The second hit came in from an angle. It pushed 682's jaw open. The creature allowed it, set its feet deeper, and kept moving forward. Stark fired a wide beam repulsor. It cut a glowing line across 682's rib plates. The plates shifted. The heat faded. Stark looked down at his wrist to read his numbers. He adjusted output 3% and tried again. He built a profile in his head and said nothing. He was not arrogant today. He was angry and efficient. Try to blind it, Black Widow said on a dedicated line. It learns from direct pressure. You do not know what this is, Otto said, and he said it with that stiff pride he used when he cared. But he listened. He fired flashbangs into its eyes and then followed with a blade to the lids when it reflexively shut them. The lids hardened. The blade bent. Otto's breath came sharp through his filter for 1 second. He controlled it the next second. 682 stopped in the middle of the street and looked at the circle around it. Small things, it said crisply. Still trying. It extended its neck and bit through a car that someone had not moved in time. The car folded. No one was inside. It spat the metal into Stark's face to test the man's reflex. Stark dodged. 682 tracked him and plotted angles and waited for the one misstep that would make him bleed for real. Helicopters moved into high hover. Police drones ran street-level feed into Otto's board. He filled a 9x9 grid with order tags and then stopped filling it when he realized the grid would not matter if the creature decided to stop playing with them. The shift happened on the 10th minute. The first 9 were damage control with a chance of containment. On the 10th, 682 put both front feet down on the intersection and pushed with its whole weight. An invisible line in the street sank by 2 meters and stopped. The city complained in deep pops. The light poles danced. The creature inhaled, held for a measured count, and exhaled slow. Its body temperature rose by 30 degrees. The air around it shivered. Stark read the numbers and blinked behind his screen. He tried to jam the rise with cold mass. The cold fogged and rolled off without effect. It is adapting, Otto said flatly. No dramatics. He knew the word did not help. He redirected resources anyway because that was what he did when data turned. He ordered his spiderlings to pull filaments across the next 3 blocks and to anchor them into buildings at load-bearing points. He ordered a ring of shock pylons to come out of the street like teeth. He meant to pin it under its own change. 682 turned its head toward him and laughed. It was a low sound that came out of a throat full of stone. I always do. Thor tried to close again, because Thor never watched anything break without trying to break back. He went head-on with hammer forward. 682 met the hammer with one hand and squeezed. Odin force sparked and died under its fingers. Thor's eyes widened. He pulled. The hand did not let go. The creature leaned in close to Thor's face and inhaled taste and history. I hate gods. It let go and knocked Thor across 3 lanes with no anger. It did not need anger. It had purpose. Captain America darted in low, shield up, and targeted a joint with the edge like a chisel. The edge scored the scale. The scale grew thicker around the mark in a smooth wave. He stepped back immediately without shame and found a new job. He started calling moves and traffic routes to keep people from dying. He looked at Otto once. Otto ignored it and kept working because he could not do both things. Hawkeye shot at an eye with a drill head arrow and got a nice line of green fluid for his trouble. The line closed. Black Widow watched it close and said, "That was 13 seconds. She loaded a different head. Try lithium." It did nothing. She did not waste another arrow on that. She moved back into the lane that kept civilians alive. I watched in private and said nothing. My arms stayed folded. My breathing stayed even. My thoughts stayed in lines. I felt satisfaction in small pulses when the grid widened and when the team did not panic. I felt interest when 682 learned faster. The SCP network across other universes began to return full preliminary status. Hits and holds. Most on schedule. Some ahead. Some slow. Nothing failed that mattered. No gate collapsed. No cluster broke. Only this universe mattered to me now, for this hour, because I wanted to see the first collision between a world that prided itself on order and a living weapon designed to test orders until they snapped. Otto tried an electromagnetic kill shot on a nerve node he identified under the neck spines. His math was right. The pulse hit clean. The creature's muscles locked for one count. On the second count it unlocked and shook him off with a backhand that dented his chest plate. He grunted but did not fly. He slid 2 feet and reset. His jaw clenched on a word that did not leave his mouth. Stark stopped trying to cut and tried to trap. He deployed a wedge of hard light in front of the thing's feet and an inverted wedge behind. He curved them up until they met. The cage looked neat. He was proud of the tech. He had reason. It held a celestial fragment for 6 seconds once. 682 leaned into the front wedge and pushed. The wedge held for 3 seconds. It smoked. It fractured. It blew outward and took out 2 floors of a clean office building that had already been evacuated. Stark took the loss on his chin and swore under his breath. He did not repeat it. He tried something else. He had range. "Stark," Otto said, strained but controlled. "Directional sound. Try 4 tones in rapid cycle." It showed audio aversion. Stark didn't argue. He broadcast 4 tones that had no harmony. "They hurt my ears." 682's head dipped once. It shook it off. The ear openings sealed and new openings formed behind them. The tones hit the new holes and settled as if the creature had been born with them. It blinked slowly. "No." "Noted," Otto said, flat. He reallocated the sound towers to crowd control and pushed them away. SHIELD command arrived on the ground in one of Fury's tight-lipped squads. This world's Fury did not trust Otto. He did not trust Stark either. He looked at the creature, adjusted his eye line, and started calling evacuation corridors that cut through the stubborn points. He freed 24 blocked lanes in a minute. It did not touch the fight. It saved lives. No one said thank you. It was not the day for that. 682 chose to test limits by simply walking forward through the ring. It used no special attack. It used weight and speed. It swapped gate to one that fell into the gaps in the net Otto had made. It did not open its mouth. It did not waste breath. It moved until someone made it stop. Thor planted himself. He put both feet down and set his shoulders. He called lightning down the shaft of his hammer and let it roll through his arms. It hit 682 in the chest. The lightning went into the plates, not around them. The plates flickered and drank. Thor's mouth tightened. He changed angle and tried to hammer a joint with raw force. The joint closed and opened on his timing. It learned him while he learned it. He did not give up. He did not have it in him. Captain America tried to turn the fight into lines and kept failing with patience. He moved civilians. He called signals. He stayed moving. He kept the team from crossing too often. He understood that the fight could not be won with a lucky throw. He did not pretend. He did not retreat. He did his job with a steady jaw that said he knew when he could not win and would not stop anyway. Otto pulled a heat blade from a forearm and went under the body at the belly. He meant to find a seam along the postural plates where the armor ended. He did not find one. The blade sank an inch and stopped. He forced it another inch and gained nothing of use. 682 lowered its ribcage and tried to crush him. He powered the arms and shoved the weight up long enough for Stark to yank him out with a tractor pull that bent nearby flagstones into neat lines. Otto breathed 2 hard times and shut the channel before he cursed. He remembered his cameras were on. I kept my presence hidden and allowed my mouth to curve for 1 heartbeat. The feeling passed. SCP-682 stepped into Times Square. Massive displays flashed warnings and emergency routing. The creature's head turned slowly, taking in the light and motion. "I hate this," it said again in the same flat tone. Then it cut through the biggest advertisement board with a single slash of its forelimb, as if swatting a fly. I looked down at the pavement where Otto's spiderlings had anchored a new pattern. He was learning and changing. He had run cables under the street and he was about to try to lift the entire intersection into a bowl. Good. He gave the order. The machinery under the city answered and the ground rose a meter, then 2. It made a ring. 682 stepped on the near rim and pushed. The metal underneath snapped. The ring flattened. The machine died. Otto's teeth showed for 1 millisecond. He reset his jaw. "Containment fails," Stark said plainly. "No drama. We drive it to the river." "I am aware," Otto answered. His voice was stiff with control. He ate the taste of failure because there was nothing else to do with it. They tried. They pushed with fire and force and filaments and pressure. 682 stepped into each pressure and changed shape at the point of contact. It did not swell in size. It did not make a show. Skin turned to plates where plates were needed. Joints shifted where joints gave leverage. It made itself into the exact tool to deny the plan. That was its nature. I let the fight go on. I did not interfere. This universe needed the lesson. It would get it and it would live because I allowed it. That was not arrogance. That was a clear note in my head. The SCP net in this world would not trigger mass termination in a living city unless I gave the order. I did not. I wanted to watch Otto, Stark, Rogers, Thor, and their people encounter a force that did not negotiate and could not be flattered by speeches. I tracked the creature's adaptation curves to be sure it did not break too fast. They were within bounds. I checked the larger network every 30 seconds. Reports came in from everywhere. SCP-173 had appeared in a deep mine on a low-tech world and had been sealed by a unit that had never blinked at the wrong time in 10 minutes. SCP-106 ran through a shipyard on a desert planet and learned the taste of naval steel before a containment dome cooled and fixed around it. SCP-001, Gate Guardian, stayed where it always stayed, unchanged, unmoved, unmovable. My grid accounted for it with the necessary gap. No friction. No error. I looked back at Times Square. Otto had driven the creature 20 meters with a precise push and a cold line of orders. Stark gave ground and took angles. Thor stopped trying to crush the head and began breaking rhythm by going for elbows. Captain America shifted crowd control to a private channel and was now 5 moves ahead of a bus whose driver had refused to yield because fear had blended with duty. Black Widow moved between police lines with knives that had charge in them. She did not waste emotion. Hawkeye used 2 arrows to foresee a turn and keep a child from running into the fight. He did not look at the child after. He was already aiming at something else. SCP-682 stopped once more. It looked from one face to another. Still trying, it said again in a tone that had more interest now. That was not ideal for the city. It was excellent for the larger test. I felt my mouth twitch again. I let the twitch pass. It swelled one section of its throat. New sacs formed under the jaw. Experience said acid. Stark saw it and recognized the move. Mouth, he said on general. Otto heard and jumped for the jawline without a pause. Thor read the cue and went for a temple strike to misalign the aim. Captain America raised his shield to catch what got through. Black Widow pulled 2 civilians out of the spray zone. Hawkeye fired a foam pack into the open mouth at the exact second of release. The pack did not stop acid. It redirected flow for 1 beat. The beat was enough. The bulk of the spray hit a wall and cut stone. The rest turned a car into slag. No one died. Stark said nothing, but his breath left his chest in a small sound of relief that carried over the open channel. I adjusted nothing. I kept watching. I was not bored. This was the exact thing I wanted, a living world in full power, meeting one piece of my wave and refusing to kneel while still being forced to change. It would change more. It would keep changing. It would never catch up. That was the point. SCP-682 stopped playing. It lowered its head and sprinted. It aimed at the river. The team tried to wrap it. They failed. It hit the water and vanished into a boil. Stark swore into his glove. Otto ran the river grid and found it again under a ferry that had already cleared. He rerouted patrol boats in a hard arc. They chased shadows. The creature moved fast, left turns in flat lines, and was gone in 70 seconds. We will find it, Otto said into a quiet that had no one to impress. He was speaking to himself. He needed the sentence like a tool to put in his hand. He squeezed his hands and opened them. He looked at Stark over an unshared history. Stark nodded once, iron thin. Captain America shaded his eyes and looked at the river where there was no enemy. Thor lowered his hammer and exhaled once. Black Widow took a count of faces and shook her head at a number that had fallen short and still not broken her. Hawkeye did the same in his own way. I stood on the scaffold above all of them with my arms folded and let out a slow hiss of breath that sounded like a quiet laugh and not quite. My chest felt lighter for a second. Then it settled. I turned my head and looked up. The barrier trembled in clean math. The ring in my base universe answered with steady pulses. The grid told me that the second line waves had hit 1% beyond target and that the result was an advantage I would keep. The SCPs across realities reported back with words that did not care about pride. They logged numbers. They logged mass. They logged heartbeats where appropriate and logged zeros where there was no such thing. I turned my eyes back to the river. The wake from 682's sprint settled and smoothed. Otto clicked through maps without commentary. Stark hovered and scanned. Fury's field squads cut the city into sections and worked without speeches. The sky grew darker by 1 degree as clouds formed from heat and steam. The city turned its lights on. The fight paused. It did not end. I masked my presence deeper and moved to a new perch. I would keep watching for a while. I had room now. The universe that birthed my lattice was gone in good order and now only existed as its function. The multiverse had received my work. It was starting to crack at the edges of its old pride. It would crack more. It would not matter if one man felt insulted or one team felt vengeful. It would matter that they learned to live inside the system I had made or they did not live at all. That was not a threat. That was a schedule. I let my jaw unclench and closed my eyes for 1 second. My hands opened and closed once. My shoulders rolled. I listened to the city breathe under the weight of the last hour. Then I opened my eyes and went back to work. Chapter 19, The River Grid. I did not mask the city's sound. I let it come into me in full detail. Sirens, rotor wash, the thud of boots against concrete, the hard rhythm of traffic forced to stop, the stifled shouts of officers pushing people away from danger, the shorter cries of those who did not understand new orders. I stood on steel high above the river and kept still. I kept my energy field set to cold silence. No one looked up. No one felt heat where none existed. That was the point. SCP-682 moved under the Hudson without hurry. Its wake was thin, hard to see, easy to lose. It had no reason to make noise. It shifted its mass to match the river's pressure and slid against the current without drag. Flow sensors along the piers recorded a soft rise, then nothing, then a soft rise farther down. Otto Octavius worked his grid in measured motions. He rotated his Spiderling teams out of the forward line and gave the city to first responders while he followed his target with charts and simple commands. His tone stayed even. The sharp edge in it came from oxygen debt and control, not panic. Spiderling Pack Gamma, he said on the private loop. Drop to river level and hold 30 meters above the surface. Switch to passive tracking. Feed to me and to Stark. Copy, a synthetic voice answered. He drilled into the maps and pulled up low-scan data from city utilities. He pulled up intake reports from power plants upriver. He summoned ferry telemetry and put it in a separate panel. His hands did not stop moving. He asked no one for permission. He used what he had built for control and turned it into a net. Tony Stark hovered over the water at 200 meters and ran 3 sensor suites. He adjusted range brackets quickly and without comment. He fed Otto a strip of dish returns without pride or insult. He took the second strip for himself and looked for changes in density under the surface. He logged every noise he heard. He threw away noise that did not repeat. A pattern built itself under his hands in short lines. Captain America moved to the west side and took charge of exit points. He did not watch 682. He watched the people who could not see it. He broke a barricade here and moved it there. He stood between an officer and a shouting man and lowered his hands and his voice until the man stopped shouting. He did not blame. He did not allow an argument to waste time. He pointed and moved on. He did the simple work and saved minutes. Minutes mattered. Thor hung low enough to see detail and high enough to avoid water interference. He rotated his hammer in small circles to keep the charge live. He did not speak unless he had a cause. He took 2 deep breaths and kept his eyes on the faster currents. When Stark pointed, he shifted position without debate. Black Widow moved along the shore with a simple kit and a small team. She focused on choke points and kept them open. She sent 2 paramedics into a zone with a hard gesture. She pulled a slow driver out of a lane, pushed him into a better lane, and gave no apology when he scowled. She kept count in her head and logged deaths where they happened. She sent the numbers to Maria Hill. Fury received the tactical feed and said nothing. He walked a block with a phone at his ear and talked to a commander on a bridge. He cleared that bridge in 50 seconds and kept moving. Hawkeye took a rooftop and watched the river's surface. He knew nothing about sonar plots. He knew about water's behavior around moving bodies. He paired his eyes with Stark's screen and called small corrections that instruments did not catch. 2 degrees south. Watch the eddy where the tug turned. That swirl is wrong. Stark adjusted. They found the path again. Stark said good without lift in his voice. Hawkeye blew air out through his nose and reset his stance. The superior Spider-Man costume held Otto's ribs tight. He did not like that. He did not loosen the seal. He spoke to the city's automated road control and opened 3 lanes that had been closed for years. He ignored the policy report that told him those lanes were meant to stay closed. He moved units through the gaps and closed them again. He did not look at 682 as a beast. He looked at it as a problem that had to be pulled into a shape before it grew beyond the city's reach. The creature's path angled toward the south and the docks. It sank deeper. The river cooled in a thin band that moved with it. Stark plotted the thermal drop and drew a cell around it on Otto's map. Otto marked it and asked the spiderlings to bounce a sonar ping down through the thermal layer. They did. The return came back as a long, hard line that carried through silt and rock. 682's skull reflected with clean edges. It changed direction the moment the ping hit. It did not panic. It did not flinch. It adjusted to a new lane and slowed by a thin margin. Otto's jaw worked once. He took the data and pulled drones off the direct path. He ran them ahead and set them to passive. 682 sped up again. Otto adjusted the frequency of the street sensors and got a clean read 14 blocks south. He circled the block on his map and sent no one to its edge. He wanted the target to keep moving in a predictable way until he had a place to fight it that did not stack bodies. Police boats maintained a staggered line along the midstream. The pilots had steady hands. They did not open fire. They worked bumpers and ropes and kept ferries from cutting across the pursuit. A frogman team asked for a drop. A commander refused and told them to wait for orders. The frogmen looked at the water and at the commander. They did not jump. They stayed in the boat and gripped the gunnels until their knuckles whitened. Maria Hill's voice came through the shield net with a flat calm. The thing adapts. Stay off heavy weapons until we know how it eats them. Priority is movement and perimeter integrity. We are not building it new advantages. Let Otto run his plan. Avengers retain autonomy for lethal calls. Captain America heard her and nodded even though she could not see it. He heard the small insult in Let Otto and ignored it. He saw the use in a single line of command and did not fight it. He told officers on the west side to clear the piers down to Battery Park. They did not argue with him. They moved. Thor came down low over the water and scanned for a break in the surface. He saw only steam, oil, and a film of foam from broken waves. He frowned and looked to Stark for input without trying to hide it. Stark pointed to the thermal drop again. Thor followed the point without a word. SCP-682 surfaced once in the middle of the river and inhaled. It exhaled with force. The spray hit a police boat at range and turned the paint to powder. The hull held. The boat rocked and recovered. The pilot's hand trembled at the wrist for 2 seconds. It steadied. He adjusted course and kept the line. Otto put 3 spiderlings in a triangle and set them to throw a mesh if 682 surfaced again within their reach. They would try to glue the mouth first, then the eyes, then the forelimbs. It would not hold. He knew that. He did it anyway because seconds counted. He took a breath and forced the breath out through his teeth. He moved his hands with full speed and no waste. Hawkeye took a second rooftop and a second angle. He adjusted his bow scope to account for glare. He vector-checked 2 cranes and a tower reflection and cut those alignments from his head so they did not confuse him later. He logged a shape that could be 682's wake and did not call it. He watched for confirmation. A bubble line rose. He called it. Surface break at Pier 32. 15 meters off the end. Stark arrived at the point in 4 seconds. Thor took 5. Otto sent 2 spiderlings to throw their nets and ordered a foam burst from a hydrant rig. The foam soaked the surface and filled the gap 682 needed for a clean breach. The creature moved under it and turned. It avoided the net and the foam with a small change in angle and depth. It did not slow. It learned their rhythm. Black Widow stood on a pier 10 blocks away and watched the water through a narrow slit in her mask. She radioed 3 warnings to the bridge control. The third one got through. A bridge that had been stuck open for a year closed halfway, then fully. The lanes cleared behind it. A convoy of 3 buses and 1 van left the danger zone. She logged the success and moved to the next choke point. Captain America approached a ferry captain on foot and asked for his list. The man shook and tried to find it. Rogers put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Take it slow. I have time." The man breathed. He found the list. Rogers scanned it and delegated duties to 4 crew with lines that did not draw attention. The ferry spun in its lane and left. Rogers watched it go until the angle was right, then turned back to the city. Tony Stark brought a new sensor online. It was specialized for high-density acid traces against heavy water. It found a line with hard edges and flagged it. He highlighted the line and spoke. "There." He did not shout. He did not add anything else. "Confirmed," Otto said, eyes on the same line. He plotted 4 intercepts and sent them to Thor, Stark, and 2 shield boats. Thor took the inner lane against the current. Stark took the outer where acceleration would give him the advantage. The boats took the straight line and the clean water. Otto placed himself at the downstream end with a set of drills he had not tested outside simulation. SCP-002 angled up and broke the surface at high speed. It opened its mouth and took in air with a rough pull. The spiderling trio threw their net. The mesh hit the snout and stuck for 1 heartbeat. The creature's skin shifted from slick to rough. Barbs formed and cut through the mesh. It shook its head once. The webbing tore into strips. The strips fell and hit the surface. They hissed and sank. Thor struck the head with a vertical blow. The hammer carried full charge. The blow landed and did not sink into bone. The force traveled through the body and into the water. The water exploded in a line. The pressure shoved the creature 2 meters down. It returned with a snap of its neck that sent spray in a tight cone. Thor covered his eyes for 1 second and laughed once in anger. He set his feet on air and came down again. Stark flanked and fired a needle through the inner ear. He chose velocity over heat. The needle carried a microcharge that detonated at the third bony canal. The head jerked sideways. The implant disintegrated. There was no lasting effect. Stark swore and moved to a new angle. Otto fired 2 drills into the water from a powered frame bolted to a pier. The drills were short, dense, and designed to bite into hard material. They found purchase on the skin along the lower jaw and hooked. They pulled hard. The body's forward motion broke 1 cable in an instant. The second held. Otto leaned on a lever with full body weight. The frame screamed and bent. The hole around its mount widened. The cable held for a count of 4. It snapped. The frame shuddered. Otto's joints absorbed the shock. His mouth pulled back to bare teeth, and then his lips flattened again. Captain America reached a group of officers near a restaurant. The owner refused to leave. He wanted to lock the door. Rogers took the keys and threw them to a sergeant without raising his voice. The owner shouted again. Rogers looked at him and said, "You can stand next to me or you can stand behind the line." The man stood behind the line. Rogers nodded once and ran back to the pier. Black Widow caught 2 kids behind a dumpster with their phones out. She swatted the phones out of their hands and shoved them away from the water. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She moved on. Hawkeye tracked air traffic and called a helicopter that had drifted into an unsafe path. The pilot heard him and pulled up. The blades hit a gust. The chopper wobbled and recovered. Hawkeye held his breath for a count and let it out. He looked back at the water and found his line again. SCP-682 rolled onto the surface and aimed for the sea. The body lengthened along the spine. Fins formed along the ribs in a joining seam. The speed increased. The water went flat behind it. It was going to leave unless stopped by a barrier this city did not have. Otto Octavius made a choice. He keyed a code into a hidden panel that only he knew. A heavy grid rose from the river bottom across a span of 20 meters. It should not have been there. He had put it there without permission. The metal came up in a clean arc. The creature hit the grid chest first. The grid flexed and held. The force bled out through shock mounts into several buried piers. The grid sang with stress. The city's budget would break when the bill arrived. Otto gripped the railing and shouted into his mask once in relief. He shut the sound off as it left his mouth. The grid held for 8 seconds. It failed at 9. The central bar snapped and the outer frame tore free from its mounts. The creature pushed through. It lost speed by 1/3. It gained deeper into the channel again. "Where did you get that?" Stark asked on a locked line. His tone was flat and hostile. He knew the answer. "I am protecting the city," Otto said with a tight throat. "That was not in the plan," Stark said. "It worked," Otto said. He did not apologize. He did not ask for permission in the past. He did not ask now. Thor came in again. He did not care about grids. He hit what he could reach. He found a joint in the shoulder and hammered it until the joint stiffened and the arm moved at a worse angle. He took that as progress and stayed on it. He shouted once out of simple effort. He did not waste breath on a speech. Captain America threw his shield at the jaw hinge from a pier 2 blocks down. The edge lodged for 1 second and popped free. The hinge tissue grew denser. The shield came back with a higher rate of spin. He caught it and moved again. SCP-682 exhaled a thin stream of acid at a low angle across the water. It was not a spray. It was a steady line that cut through the grid's wreckage and into 2 pilings. They sloughed away. The pier shifted and settled by a small amount. A captain at the far end moved his people off in good order. Maria Hill's voice cut in again. "We are closing bridges. Evacs continue. No experimental warheads. No orbital strikes." Stark did not argue. He rechecked his last 3 options and threw them away. He called for a Stark sub in high-speed mode. It was 20 minutes away at best. It would be useless when it arrived. He called it anyway and told it to remain at standby. He looked at Otto's frame and realized it had more weight than looked proper. He said nothing about that. He filed it. I adjusted my vantage point by 20 meters and watched the current around the creature's tail. It was gaining speed again. New joints formed and propelled it in a way that cut friction. It had learned this river in one pass. It would not be boxed here again. Otto saw it too. His mouth tightened. He accepted the loss and moved to Phase 2. He pulled his teams back from the waterline. He cleared all but the heavy units with high insurance coverage from the next 6 blocks. Responsibility shows at small edges. He kept the risk for himself and for the paid. I stood with my arms folded and let my chest rise in a small breath. The air came in cool. The steel under my feet vibrated with a steady rhythm. My mind stayed clear. The larger network checked in on schedule. SCPs reported from galaxies I had not seen with my eyes. They sent numbers and would send more. The rings in my home base dropped load to sustain gates at a lower cost. The barrier flexed and held. Everything ran. SCP-682 passed the battery and slid into open water. Stark pursued over the harbor and checked for incoming ships. He rerouted 3 with a strong signal. They moved. Thor followed 1 length above and 1 length behind. He would keep the pressure on without hitting a civilian ship by mistake. He settled into that job and did not fight it. Otto stared at the map and built a future line. He set city teams on a pattern of alerts that would trigger when the creature turned back inland. He locked control of 3 tunnels and a set of floodgates. He set them to manual override from his own board. He told no one he had done it. He told himself he would return the controls when this ended. Captain America walked a block with 2 paramedics and cleared a lane with his hands when cones and tape failed. He bent, picked up an old man's bag, and put it in the old man's hands. He nodded to him and left. Thor's voice came across the general line with a simple report. It moves to the sea. I continue. Rogers said good and turned back to the next task. Black Widow took a measure of the civilian casualties. She spoke the numbers into her recorder. She did not add a word about sadness or anger or policy. She knew which conversations did not use words. She pocketed the recorder and kept moving. Hawkeye packed his bow, took a new rooftop, and ate a gel bar while he ran his eyes across the harbor for 10 minutes. He spoke only once. Sharks are getting out of the way. That is a sign. He put the wrapper away and went back to work. SCP-082 approached the sea wall. The water took on a heavier roll. The horizon opened. The creature found the path to deep water and took it. The last of the city's weapons could not follow it there. It would come back when it wanted. It did not want to yet. It wanted data. It had it. Otto stood alone on a pier and stared at water that had closed over an enemy he did not understand and could not keep. He did not sag. He put his hands on the rail and pressed until his fingers shook. He let them shake and did not hide it because no one stood close enough to see. He straightened and pulled in a long breath that he forced to slow. He keyed his private line. Spiderlings, regionally deploy, he said in a careful tone. Grid the river. Set autonomous alarms. Prepare underwater drones for pursuit in 2 hours. I want 1,000 sensors seated along the corridor to the shelf. Pay the fine later. Confirmed, the voice answered. Stark landed on the pier and set his hands on his hips. He did not make a scene. He did not swing his head around. He watched the water for 3 seconds. Well. Otto did not turn. We will make it pay later. His voice was dry. He did not raise it. Later works, Stark said. He looked over his shoulder at a ruined grid bracket. He filed it for later, and not just for the bill. You good? I am correct, Otto said. He did not smile. He did not pretend friendship. He took the data and put it in his head where he kept the things that needed to be broken down into steps. Captain America arrived and gave them both a look that carried no contempt and no praise. People are alive, he said. That is the win for the hour. Otto nodded once. Stark nodded once. Thor's voice came across the channel. The beast goes to cold water. It will rest and return. He stated it in a plain tone. He did not ask permission to go after it. He knew storms and seas. He knew patience when storms lay down across a horizon. He knew that even gods rested between strikes. I stood in shadow and kept still. My chest rose and fell. I allowed a thin line of satisfaction across my mouth and smoothed it at once. This was the start I wanted here. The world had met one of my creatures and had not folded. It had not beaten it either. It had learned that some battles had no end and no victory flag. It would change in the days that came. It would build machines that tried to answer 682 and creatures like it. Those machines would hold until they broke. Then they would hold again, better. That was useful. I kept watching while the river grid went live along 200 points. I watched drones drop into the water with little splashes. I listened to the hum of equipment in the piers. I watched the Avengers disperse. Rogers took an unglamorous truck bed to the west side and helped load. Natasha Romanoff spoke to Maria Hill quietly, then went back into the city to follow a line I could not see on a screen. Stark lifted and flew south, dipped once, and rose again. He checked every square of his map. He lowered and spoke with a firefighter for 60 seconds. He rose again. He did not announce any of it. Thor took a slow line along the shoreline and looked far. He blinked against the wind and the salt. He turned once in a wide arc and returned to the city side. Otto returned to his board and laid his hands on the frame's edge. He ran his fingers along the seam he had bent. He would fix it. He would not ask anyone for money. He looked at his city and at the water and at the places where he had cheated to hold it today. He did not regret the cheat. He would do it again when it mattered. He shut down 3 channels, reopened 2, and went to work. I felt the multiverse press at the edges of my awareness. The SCP network sent new returns. I split my vision and watched 6 places at once without breaking concentration here. 173 stood in its box. It had 3 visitors who did not blink. 106 wore a new skin. 049 walked through a village that had plague in its bones even before he arrived. 3000 turned in deep water somewhere else and would not see humans for weeks. 096 sat on a cliff and shook and did not move. My work held. My lattice sang. The barrier lapped and did not crash. I stayed in the superior world for hours. I tracked 682 on the river grid while Stark and Otto rebuilt their maps. It did not surface again near the city. It took a half-day to find a new point of attack. It would not do so here. It would choose a new angle on a new shore. That was fine. The city had earned a night. Night fell. The lights filled in the dark. The sirens slowed. The helicopters landed and shut down. The hum that remained belonged to ongoing work. I kept my post and adjusted nothing. I would keep watching until the numbers on the grid changed and told me that this world had either found a larger tool than any it had brought today, or had chosen to ask for silence in places where noise had always ruled. Either way, it would serve daybreak. I let the steel cool under my hands. I breathed through my chest in deep, steady pulls. The river ran. The sea waited. The multiverse turned in its new harness and did not yet know it held one. I watched and did not blink. Chapter 20, A Good Day for Trouble. I left Superior Earth with the city lights still working and the river grid humming like a deep drum. I took one last look at the dark water, felt the even pull of the current, and stepped sideways through the fold. The gate closed behind me with a neat snap. The new universe received me with clean air and a steady heartbeat that carried an old tune I recognized at once: stubborn hope, sharp edges, and a habit of standing up straight even when the world pushed. I smiled. I liked this one already. I landed above a green stretch of Virginia forest with a quiet sound and a soft thump in the earth. It smelled like pine and fresh rain. A road cut through the trees with white lines that still looked new. A convoy moved along it: black sedans, 2 armored SUVs, and a retro-styled motorcycle at the rear. The motorcycle carried a man who sat loosely, hands gentle on the bars, eyes busy and kind even when narrowed. Steve Rogers looked older than the last time most people had seen him, but not tired. Gravity stuck to him the way loyalty sticks to a flag. He wore a plain leather jacket. The shield rode in a round case on the rear. The lead sedan's window was down. Peggy Carter leaned out to look at the sky, chin lifted, eyes bright. Her hair was cut for work. Her mouth had that little half-smile that came out when everything was going wrong and she intended to make it go right on principle. A gold band on her finger caught a line of sun and flashed. She tapped the car door twice with 2 fingers and called forward in a clipped tone, "Left lane in half a mile. We'll make the ramp." "Copy," the driver said cheerfully. I felt my mood rise like a clean flame. I liked the look of the road today. I liked the fact that some worlds kept their promises. The good mood lasted exactly 9 seconds. A sound tore across the trees, a high, thin cry that ran off the bark with a sawtooth edge. Birds burst from the branches in a cloud and fled. The convoy slowed. Steve's head turned. Peggy's eyes narrowed. The sound came again. It shook the leaves. It carried no words, only pain shaped like a siren. The motorcycle engine ticked down. Steve dismounted in one clean motion. He flipped the case, clicked it twice, and pulled the shield free. No drama. No posing. He stepped onto the shoulder and lifted his chin to listen. The cry ended with a wet, hard sob. The next sound came from the trees on the right, bodies moving in brush with speed. Men shouted once in surprise and were cut off mid-breath. Gunfire cracked in short bursts. It ended too quickly. Something heavy crashed into the road. The second SUV swung across both lanes and braked. Agents in dark suits stepped out and set a line with good form and tight mouths. Peggy stepped out behind the door and rested one elbow on the window. She did not duck. She watched and counted. Eyes, she snapped, voice brisk. No one looks up without permission. Get those phones away. Steve lifted a hand and whistled. The line steadied. He kept his voice low and clear. No photos. No helmets with visors. Stay with your spotter. Don't blink alone. Peggy glanced at him with a small lift of one eyebrow. Blink? Just in case, he said evenly. He didn't smile. He didn't explain. He had seen enough of my work by now to know the basics. The world had changed, and he was famous for catching up. I dropped 20 meters closer and stayed invisible. The trilene broke like paper. A long white figure with arms too long for its body stumbled out, mouth open, head down. SCP-096 did not look at the convoy. It did not look anywhere. It held its face with both hands and rocked as it walked. It shook with tiny, constant tremors. Its ribs showed like a narrow ladder. It muttered in a small, broken tone that tore the air to thin strips. Two agents flinched. Peggy's head snapped. Away, she said sharply. No eye contact. Nobody raises a camera. Get the back formation into a full blindfold. Blindfold? A younger agent asked, throat tight. Steve didn't wait. He tossed his jacket at the man's chest. Do it. His tone was plain and firm. If you look, it runs at you until you stop breathing. If you don't, it doesn't care you exist. Do not test that. The man nodded hard, cheeks flush with fear. He copied the motion along the line. Fabric went up over faces. Sunglasses hit the road. Phones vanished into pockets. Peggy's voice stayed crisp and steady. Good. Stay on rope. Left hand on the shoulder in front of you. If someone stops, you stop. We're walking blind if we need to walk at all. The ground trembled. Not from 096. From the pack behind it. Four red shapes slid between trees with their heads low and jaws open. Teeth like wet knives. SCP-939s came out in a staggered line, tongues tasting the air. They moved like they'd been born in these woods. They kept their bellies close to the ground and their shoulders loose. One of them opened its mouth and spoke in a woman's voice that sounded tired and hopeful. Hello? Is someone there? Can you help me? The words were exact. The tone was perfect. The mouth made the sound and smiled like a human smile. The body did not match it. Steve's eyes tightened. His shoulders squared. He didn't raise the shield yet. He let the pack think he was slow. Peggy watched their feet. She did not look at the fake face. She didn't let anyone else either. Earmuffs, she said briskly. Or plugs. Move. The line obeyed. Agents shoved soft orange foam into their ears. Steve didn't need them. He shook his head once and reset his stance. The pack slowed, confused for a second when their voices hit dead ears. Then they spread out again, learning. Smart predators. That was fine. Steve had met smart predators before. SCP-096 kept walking. It bumped into the road sign and trembled. It held its face tighter and moaned. It had not yet seen anything. It was a hazard waiting to happen, not a disaster in motion. Yet. I spoke in my head with an easy tone. Good day to practice. Perfect pairings. If they were going to learn, better with someone who could carry the lesson. My chest warmed. I liked the way Steve's mouth set. I liked the line of Peggy's shoulders. I liked the speed with which the line changed posture when told. I liked this world's habit of listening to the right people at the right time. Two more shapes stepped out of the brush. One was small and round, made of cheap brown plush with little ears and a stitched smile. It held a matchbox violin and scraped the string. Sound came out wrong. The air shuddered. SCP-066 did not look like trouble until it opened its mouth and said, "Eric." The word rolled, heavy and stretched. Sound waves doubled in place and bit themselves. The nearest agent clapped both hands over his ears and grimaced. Steve snapped his head to the side. "Noise control," he said, "steady. Keep your mouths shut. Don't yell. Keep it calm." The other creature behind 066 was smaller and faster. I saw the shimmer and knew its trick. SCP-106's corrosion scent was not here. Good. We didn't need that today. This one was a 939 juvenile that had made itself thin and nimble. It tilted its head and crooned in Peggy's exact voice, 1 hour younger. "Steve, dear, you'll want to." Steve did not move his eyes. He lifted the shield and angled it to cover Peggy's line. He smiled lightly, open and polite. "Flattering. Won't work." His tone was cheerful on purpose. He meant it for his people, not the thing. Peggy's mouth twitched. "You're making faces at an animal," she said briskly. "Save the charm for something that reacts to it." "You married me," he said happily, not looking away from the pack. "It was a lapse," she said with a dry edge that hid warmth badly. The line steadied around them. Fear folded into small smiles. Not much, but enough. One of the 939s crept closer in a low crouch. It breathed in short, even pulls. It licked the road once and tasted oil. It opened its mouth. "Please," it said in a child's voice. "Please, I can't feel my legs." The agent beside Peggy flinched again. She didn't turn. She tapped his wrist with 2 fingers and he stiffened his elbow. She spoke in his ear, soft and even. "It is not a child. Keep your breath steady. Good lad." SCP-096 bumped the road sign again and moaned louder. The moan went up in pitch. I felt the warning like a hand on my neck. I looked away by reflex and set a blank panel in my mind where its face would be if it raised its head. I liked this game. It kept the circuits honest. Steve moved first. He put the shield down in the gravel and rolled it with 1 foot. It cut a clean curve into the 939 pack like a flat saw. 2 jumped. The third took it in the shoulder and screamed in a voice that wasn't its own. The scream hit the trees and bounced. Birds exploded from a pine and fled. The shield returned. Steve caught it and shifted 1 foot back. The pack split. 1 ran left. 1 ran right. 2 came straight ahead. Steve stepped into the first with a short rush. He slammed the shield into the lower jaw. Teeth snapped shut with a hollow clap. The head jerked. Peggy reached under the agent's arm and fired 2 rounds into the joint behind the shoulder with clinical precision. The rounds lodged shallow. The creature screamed again, this time in a grown man's voice that sounded surprised and offended. It reeled and ran backward on 3 limbs, fast and low. "Bullets are not effective," Peggy said sharply, settling into the job. "We'll use vehicles." "Steve, drive it." "Drive it where?" he asked cheerfully. "Anywhere that is not into my husband," she replied calmly. "Yes, ma'am," he said with a grin that did not touch his eyes. He stepped forward to oblige. The pack adjusted as if it understood the joke. The left runner cut behind a car and tried to flank. The right runner took the line alone and hissed in a new voice that sounded like Bucky Barnes on a good day. Steve's jaw clenched at that. The cheer in his tone dropped out for one heartbeat. He didn't slow. Cheap, he said, voice steady again. Try harder. The 939 lunged for his leg. He turned his knee in and slammed the shield down like a door. The jaw grated along vibranium and broke a front tooth. The creature staggered, confused and angry. Steve took the opening and knocked it back into the ditch. It rolled, claws scrabbling. The juvenile made a snap at Peggy's arm. She dropped her shoulder, let it miss by an inch, and drove her elbow into its throat. The cartilage gave. It gagged and choked. She kicked its forelimb once and turned it onto its back with neat economy. Stay, she said curtly. Her accent thickened when she was pleased. SCP-066 lifted the cheap violin again and scraped. Eric. Sound rose in a tight column. It hurt without giving anything back. Steve's mouth tightened in annoyance. That thing is getting on my nerves. He didn't snap. He sounded like someone talking through a minor cold. He kicked 066 into the ditch without breaking stride. The plush creature flipped, landed on its feet, and said, Eric, again, a little softer, as if embarrassed. The sound still hurt. Peggy shot it once in the leg. It deflated with a sigh like a punctured toy. Good, she said briskly. If it moves, I'll shoot it again. SCP-096 swayed on its feet and opened its mouth to cry. Its fingers slipped. It almost pulled its face free. Steve snapped one word at the line without raising his voice. Down. The agents dropped into a crouch in one motion. Peggy leaned against the car door and closed one eye. She lowered her gaze to the road grid and watched the creature's legs instead of its head. She did not blink for 3 slow seconds. Then she blinked. She kept her hand on the young agent's wrist. He shook once and steadied. The juvenile 939 lied again in Peggy's voice. Roger that, pull back, it said smoothly. An agent at the rear moved uselessly. Peggy squeezed his wrist once, hard. Not me, she said sharply. Think. He flushed, nodded hard, and stayed put. Steve shifted his stance. We have to push it away from 096, he called to Peggy in a normal tone. If someone glances up, we lose the whole line. Agreed, she said with a small nod. She lifted her gun and aimed at a sign 10 meters away. She fired once. The 939s flinched toward the sound. Steve moved into the space they left and hit the leader in the face with the rim of the shield. It howled in a voice like a radio caught between stations. He knocked it into the second. They tumbled. The third ran at him low and fast. Peggy shot the asphalt under its left paw. It stumbled. Steve planted his boot in its ribs and shoved. It went spinning into the shoulder. It lay still for one count, shook, and tried to rise. He stamped its chest flat to the earth and pinned it there. Now would be a fine time for your big friends with the flying suits, Peggy said crisply into her lapel. En route, Maria Hill replied, dry and measured. 70 seconds. Try not to let anything new touch you. New things keep appearing. Yes, well, Peggy said, calm and unimpressed, welcome to our morning. Steve took a breath and let it out with a small smile that didn't fit the scene in any obvious way. It's a good morning, he said happily. You're here. Flattery after we survive, Peggy said dryly. Her mouth softened when she said it. SCP-096 took 2 steps forward and bumped the sign again. It hit the steel pole with its forehead and whimpered. It twisted its fingers into the edges of its cheeks and pulled. The skin stretched. The sound it made went through my body like cold water. It was getting closer to accidental eye contact by simple fumbling. The pack had to be cleared now. Steve knew it. His tone lost its warmth. He set his jaw and changed the angle of his body. Serious, clean, efficient. Eyes on the ground, he ordered, voice firm. Peg, take the left. I'll take the right. Push them back into the trees. We keep the big one board. Peggy didn't argue. Left, she said, matching tone. She moved like a blade. They went to work. Steve bulldozed the right side with short, hammering motions. He didn't try to kill. He tried to end the attempt. He watched feet. He hit joints. He threw bodies without drama and checked behind him between steps. He moved the pack backward, step by step, shoulder by shoulder. He did it with no temper. Strength mattered here. He had it. He used it calmly. Peggy cut the left with low shots and one kick that broke a forelimb neat. The 939 screamed in a voice that belonged to someone from her days in London, now long dead. She didn't blink. She stepped over its head and took away its balance with a short cut to the tendons. She did not step on its face. She didn't let it touch her boots. She had lines she kept in her head. She guarded them like a favorite coat. SCP-066 dragged itself out of the ditch and said Eric, in a beseeching tone. Peggy shot it in the head. It collapsed into quiet cloth. She ejected the magazine, checked her pocket, and slapped a fresh one home with quick hands. She kept her muzzle downrange the whole time. She enjoyed the motion, but only a little. Duty first. Sound rolled overhead. Stark arrived in a clean red streak, flipped into a hover, and pointed two palm cannons toward the trilene. Good morning, he said, breathless. We brought presents. Falcon came in below him with wings set in a glide. A shield Quinjet tore a thin line across the sky and banked hard. Natasha dropped out the side door with a rope and a quiet curse that sounded like Park, then corrected quickly to Mark with a small grin at her own slip. Eyes down, Peggy warned before anyone could make the worst mistake of their lives. Tony, no face scans. Already locked out, Stark said briskly. His HUD flashed with a red bar. We're using LiDAR on kneecaps and ankle angles. He fired a short, clean net of hard light that dropped across two 939s and pinned them for half a second. It helped just long enough. Steve knocked one into a tree. Natasha hit the other with a shock baton and dragged it out of the way. Falcon cut a circle in the air and pushed wind into the pack's faces. They smelled the wrong things and veered. He laughed once in relief and went up again, adjusting to the roll of wind with fast joy. SCP-096 rocked and sobbed. Its fingers slipped again and again. It couldn't keep its face hidden. Some part of it wanted the accident, because the accident gave it meaning. I felt my teeth clench. My light mood dipped and thinned. Enough. I stepped sideways along the road's shadow and raised one hand. A thin, steady field wrapped 096 from neck to floor. It didn't change what it was. It gave it weight in the right places. It stopped the fingers from slipping more than they already had. It did not hold for long. It did not fix anything. It stabilized the moment exactly as far as I wanted it stabilized. I let out a quiet breath and smoothed my smile again. I like good mornings. I prefer them not to end with a scream and a sprint across 8 countries. Peggy glanced at the creature's legs, then at the air above them, right where my field lay. She could not see it. She felt the way the road sound changed across that spot. Her brow furrowed by 1 millimeter. She said nothing. She filed it. She would look for the source later. Good. She liked truths the way some people like cake. Steve shoved the last 939 into the ditch. It tumbled and ran limping into the trees. It would live. It would heal. It would not choose this road again for a day or a week. That was enough. Stark hovered above the ditch and painted the woods with silent light to keep them moving in the wrong direction. Natasha clipped 2 hard cuffs on the ankles of the one Peggy had crippled. She looked at its teeth with measured interest and adjusted her angles so it couldn't get her boot laces. She doesn't give free bites. Peggy stepped forward with her hands up and her eyes down. All right, she said in a firm, quiet tone that you used on a panicked horse. You're doing fine. Keep your hands there. We're going to walk you to a box. It will be dark and small. You will like it very much. SCP-096 whimpered and shook. It didn't understand the words. It heard tone. It held its face and swayed. The field I set hummed at a low frequency that felt like an elevator you trust. It steadied its knees. Natasha approached in a crouch with a hood in both hands. On 3, she said softly. 1, 2, 3. She slid the hood over the head in a clean motion, careful and practiced. 096 stiffened. It did not break. She drew the drawstrings tight. The hood locked against its collarbone. She stepped back without turning her back to it. She moved with a deep, clean breath. We're good. Steve eased his stance. He let his shoulders down. He grinned with easy relief. Nice work. Peggy didn't blink. Save it until it's inside a door. She snapped her fingers at the nearest agent. You. Eyes down. Walk a rope to the Quinjet. Keep your elbow high. It'll follow. Yes, ma'am, the agent said, voice steady now. He took the rope and held it across his chest. He set his elbow high and backed away with slow steps. SCP-096 followed the rope like a tired dog. It didn't step on anyone. Natasha walked 2 meters off its shoulder with the baton ready and her mouth set. Her eyes stayed on its knees. Stark cut the equations in his HUD and ran raw visual lines to make sure no lenses in the area had a face on them. He cut 2 traffic cams without asking. He paid the fine with a credit that would bounce back and forth between dummy accounts until it dissolved. He smirked. He liked breaking small laws to prevent big funerals. I eased the field off the creature's legs 1 small notch at a time. It walked smoother. It stayed with the rope. It entered the Quinjet. The door closed. The agents breathed out in a loose, uneven wave. Peggy tapped the car door twice with her fingers again. All right, she said, voice crisp but warm now. Let's go home. Steve, you're driving. I am going to write a memo that will make 3 departments cry. Steve rested the shield on his shoulder and laughed softly. You say the sweetest things. Get in the car, she replied with a small smile. She put a hand on his forearm for 1 second before letting go. Serious again. Working again. That was the rhythm. I liked it. Stark floated down and snapped his faceplate up. He looked at the smashed grid marks, the scorched earth, the bent sign. He whistled. So. New wildlife. 10 out of 10 for personality. 0 for table manners. Peggy gave him a look that said later. He raised both hands and shut his mouth in a good-natured way. He looked at Steve and grinned. Congratulations, by the way. Again. Still jealous. He lifted off before Steve could reply, because he enjoyed leaving compliments like charges and watching them go off in private. Natasha boarded the Quinjet and took a seat across from the hooded figure. She rested the baton across her knees and watched its feet. She didn't blink without counting. She looked out the small window at the trees with a face that said she liked woods only when they stayed put. I stayed above the road and watched. My chest was light again. I held the smile and let it sit, plain and easy. I liked a world where good people fought well and didn't waste breath on speeches. I liked that two people who had earned peace got a morning and an evening and still put on their shoes for the work between them. I liked that they didn't panic at my creatures. They learned fast. They respected rules as tools. They took responsibility when it cut their palms. They were my kind of stubborn. The convoy rolled out. The Quinjet took the sky and banked east. The rope stayed taut. The hood stayed in place. The pack sounds faded into the trees, moving away, not toward. The road quieted. A squirrel jumped onto the bent sign, looked around with outrage at the damage, and left. I laughed in a soft hiss. Good. I stepped into the fold and took one more look over my shoulder at the tail lights paired on the road like clean stitches. Then I left them to their evening. Chapter 21, Box, Hood, Silence. I moved with the Quinjet at an easy pace, high and cold and unnoticed. The night air over Virginia was clean. The engines below me held a steady note. The aircraft kept a straight line east toward the airfield and then banked to a low-profile route over dark land. Inside, everything ran on a tight plan. That made me feel good. I let myself smile and stayed light on my feet in the air. Natasha sat across from the hooded figure with the baton across her knees. She rested her back straight against the bulkhead. She did not lean forward. Her eyes stayed on 096's legs. Her breathing was controlled and slow. Two agents sat beside the creature with gloves on and heads down. Each held a section of rope. They moved only when Natasha said step or halt or hold. The pilot called altitude and wind over the intercom. The voice was calm and even. He did not look back. Good. Peggy's voice cut in over the secure channel from the car convoy. Quinjet, status. Her tone was clipped and steady. Stable, Director, Natasha answered, eyes still on the knees. Target is quiet. Hood is tight. No cameras on board. All personal devices surrendered and bagged. Pilot's helmet visor is taped. We are going straight to sub-level 2. Very good, Peggy said briskly. I want a blackout path from the pad to intake. No glass. No reflective surfaces. I want paper signs along the route. No screens. If anyone holds up a phone, throw it away. Copy, Maria Hill added from the command board. Powering down corridor lights segment by segment. Red lines to the cell. No detours. Steve's voice chimed in on a sideband. It sounded warm even over the channel. You've got this. Always, Natasha said dryly. A small smile touched her mouth and faded. I drifted under the left wing and looked up through the skin. The cabin's heat showed as a dim shape. 096's outline was a narrow column hunched under heavy cloth. It trembled at intervals and then steadied. The hood worked. The rope worked. Natasha's tone worked. I let out a small breath through my nose. Relief felt simple and smooth. The Quinjet dropped toward a dark strip outside a low, flat building set into a hill. The facility used low light and old paint. A single line of lanterns showed the approach. The landing was soft. The ramp dropped with a short whine. Cold night air flowed in. 4 agents in blackout gear took positions with heads down and hands on the guide rope. Their boots were wrapped to reduce noise. Their visors wore cloth taped over them. One carried a simple cardboard sign that said stop in black marker. Another carried a sign that said step. Manual, clean, safe. Natasha stood and gave short, plain orders. We move. Keep space. Count your steps. Ready. 1. The rope pulled. 096 rose. The hood stayed on. The drawstrings held. Natasha watched the knees. The agents watched the rope. The creature made a soft sound behind the cloth. It was an unhappy sound, small and raw, not a scream. The sound made one young agent's mouth twitch. Natasha tapped his glove with 2 fingers. He steadied. The path from the pad to the intake door had already gone dark. Maria Hill's voice came through with a count. North corridor cold. South corridor cold. Pressurization normal. All cameras shut off. Lenses covered. We pulled the bulbs. Projecting arrows on the floor with paint lasers. No displays. The intake door slid aside with a dull click. Inside, the corridor was dark with red tape lines at ankle height. 2 techs crouched at a panel and pulled out a bank of drives, one by one, and carried them in bags to a locked cart facing the wall. One tech started to look up. The other grabbed the back of his collar and pushed his head down until he remembered, then patted his shoulder and kept his own eyes on the concrete floor. He looked down at his boots and stayed there until the line had passed. Good teamwork. I crossed the wall with no ripple and walked just out of sight, a few steps behind them. My mood stayed light. I felt a small warmth in my chest at the sound of strong people working well. Peggy did not waste people. Steve chose right partners. Natasha respected the plan. Maria kept the board under tight fingers. This world held together with focus and patience. I liked it. They moved down a low ramp. The air got colder. The walls changed from concrete to textured panels with no shine. At each door, an agent with head bent opened the lock, then immediately turned to face the wall with hands open so his visor could not see the hood. 2 medics stood at a side door with a gurney and did not look. They kept their eyes on the wheels and counted their own breaths. The gurney was there as a backup if the rope failed. It did not. The cell sat in sub-level 2, at the far end of a straight hall. No mirrors. No glass. No polished metal. No screens. A heavy manual door stood in a recessed frame. The door had mechanical bolts with physical bars. It looked like something built in the 1950s on purpose. The intake anteroom before it held 3 lockers and 2 bins marked optics in block letters. The bins were open. A soldier with sleeves rolled up stood there with a paper ledger and a pencil. He did not look up. He did not ask questions. He counted items by touch and scratch-marked entries. He had a ring on his finger and a stain of oil on his cuff. Real work. Peggy's heels clicked down the hall. She walked in fast with Steve beside her, both heads down. Peggy handed the soldier a phone from her pocket without being asked. Steve set his own on top of it. The soldier slid both into the bin and drew a line on the ledger. He nodded. Peggy said, "Thank you," in a tone that carried no weight but carried respect. The soldier nodded again, throat working. Steve's shoulder brushed the wall. He made small talk to keep his people easy. When the war ended, there was a bakery on 7th that made the best cinnamon rolls in the world. They were this big. He held his hand in a circle. "We're going to find a place that can beat that." Peggy's mouth softened. "There is a stall in Richmond that might rise to the challenge." "Field trip after we don't get eaten," he said happily. "After we do paperwork," Peggy said dryly. "Then perhaps." The door guard worked the bolts. He kept his head tilted down. He pulled one bar, then the second, then the third. The weight in the air shifted. The guard stepped aside and turned his face fully to the wall. The anteroom door opened inward on cheap hinges. Maria came over the channel. "Cell is dark. Red stripes on the floor. No cameras. No vents that face in." "Last check," Peggy said crisply. "Any reflective surfaces, any stray devices, any badges with lenses?" "Negative," Hill said. "We swept. We taped. We painted. We pulled the screws on the ceiling plates. Proceed, Peggy said. Natasha moved first. She kept her baton low. She put her shoulder near 096's arm and breathed slow. Walk with me, she said softly to the hood. She counted steps. 1, 2, 3. Stop. Turn. Good. Straight. The creature followed the rope with halting steps. It made the same small sound under the hood. It brushed the door frame with one shoulder and flinched. It did not fight. It held its hands to its face under the cloth and kept them there. Inside, the cell held one steel box open on the floor. The box was simple. 4 sides. Padded at the top rim so the hood would not catch. The interior was lined with sound-dampening foam. The lid had no window. The locking system was manual with a wheel. The air input came through a pipe that faced down and bent twice. No sight line. I approved that silently and felt my shoulders loosen. Natasha led the rope to the box. Step, she said quietly. Down. 096 stepped with one foot, then the other, into the box. It uncrossed its knees and tucked them up against its chest. It bowed its head. The hood shifted and settled. It did not pull at the cloth. It did not test the drawstring. It shook a little. Natasha reached and pressed the knee lightly with her knuckles. Good, she said softly, a rare tone she saved for clean work that needed praise. Stay. She moved her hand back and out. The agents with the rope slipped the line from the creature's wrists without touching skin. Natasha caught the line and pulled it clean. Close, she said. The nearest tech turned the wheel. The lid came down with a soft thump. The wheel spun. The locks engaged. 4 clicks. The room exhaled as one. Steve tilted his head back and let his eyes close for 1 second. He opened them and kept them down. Peggy looked at the checklist on the wall. She read it out loud so everyone could hear it and line their heads up with the steps. Step 1, box closed. Step 2, lock engaged. Step 3, red lamp lit. She flipped a switch. A small red bulb over the door glowed. Step 4, log entry. Step 5, audio monitor on. Low. She turned the knob on a metal box that had one dial and one switch. No screen. A gray-haired operator put on thick padded headphones and sat down on a stool with a clipboard. He did not touch his pen until Peggy said, "Record." He put the tip on paper. He made neat, small marks next to time stamps written in pencil. 096 breathed inside the box. The sound came through the wall as a faint tremor. The operator wrote one word, breathing. He set the pen down. He kept the headset on. His wrists were steady. Maria Hill's voice came in, lower now. Containment complete. Good work, Peggy said, tone warmed. She did not clap anyone. She did not raise her voice. She gave the room a small nod. The room relaxed in increments. I dropped into the ceiling and ran a sweep with my own senses. I kept it narrow and gentle. I did not want to push anything loose. I counted and tagged every lens, every reflective screw, every badge that could carry a chip. I found 4 old intercom plates that had plastic so dull it did not matter. I found one forgotten GoPro at the bottom of a rucksack in a locker that had been propped open with a shoe. I frowned and let the warmth leave my face. My chest tightened in a hard line. That was unacceptable. I slid through the wall and put my hand on the locker door. I did not open it. I wrapped the camera in a static field from where I stood and drained its storage. The memory fried with a gentle hiss that no one heard. The battery cooled. The lens still existed. The screen still existed. The data did not. I stepped back into the hall and pulled my mood up again. No harm done. No one died. The good feeling returned. Peggy did a physical sweep herself the old way. She pressed her hand along the wall seams. She ran her palm over the floor edge. She used the toe of her shoe to check corners. She did not delegate that job. Steve did the heavy part with her. He bent down and checked under a bench by feel. He looked at the underside of the latch without lifting his head. He did not shrug off the simple labor because he had other titles. He respected the room. Natasha stood with her hands behind her back and watched 096's box without blinking for a slow count, then finally allowed herself to blink. She rolled her wrist once in a tight circle. The muscles in her forearm eased and went smooth again. The operator lifted one hand and pointed at the paper. He did not speak. Peggy walked over. He had written quiet and underlined it. She nodded. "Keep going," she said softly. He nodded and resumed his watch. Maria Hill reached the cell door with a folder under her arm. She knocked twice on the frame. She did not step in until Peggy nodded. She kept her eyes down. She handed Steve a paper copy of a transport chain of custody form with blank spaces for signatures and times. He took the pen and signed. He smiled at her without cheer. "Respect." Hill's mouth softened by a fraction. "Congratulations again," she said quietly. "I didn't send a card." Peggy's eyes warmed. "You can buy us dinner that we will not attend," she said, dry. "Done," Hill said. "Back to work." "Always," Peggy replied. I turned and walked the intake path backward. I checked every corridor camera again. I extended a thin field through each lens and burned its memory buffer. I did it gently and carefully, like pulling thorns from a child's foot. The core in me that enjoyed a fight stayed quiet. This was a better feeling. Prevention. Clean runs. I liked days without funerals. In the anteroom, the soldier with the ledger closed his book and set the pencil down. His hands shook once, then steadied. Steve came out of the cell and clapped the man's shoulder with friendly weight. "Good job," he said, cheerful again now that containment held. "I've seen worse intake." This was steady. "Thank you, sir," the soldier said, surprised and pleased. He did not look up. He kept his eyes on his ledger, face quiet but warmer. Peggy came out behind Steve. She held up her hand and rotated her wrist twice. The door guard threw the bolts back into place with steady pulls. The wheel on the lid stayed still. The red bulb glowed. The operator's pencil scratched at intervals. The room exhaled again. Stark leaned in the hall with his helmet under one arm. He had stayed outside the anteroom until the last lock fell. He stepped in and tilted his head down on purpose. "No cameras," he said, as if reminding himself. "Got it. How about a nice analog cake to celebrate?" Peggy did not give him a look this time. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of her wedding band, then dropped her hand and put it in her pocket. "We can discuss cake when the woods are quiet," she said. "We still have red lizards with bad manners." "Right," Stark said. He spun the helmet in his hand. "I have a scent dampener that might make them lose our trail." "We'll start with dogs and quiet boots," Steve said with a light tone. "Then add your toys if we need them." Stark laughed softly. "I love it when you call them toys. Helps your ego," Steve said happily. "It needs no help," Stark replied with mock offense. He set the helmet on and sealed it. "I'll sweep the tree line. Call if our box scratches." "It won't," Natasha said, firm. She tapped her headset and left at a jog. I let my cheer rise high again. They had earned the light. The next part was dull work, and I liked it. Device scrubbing. Database purges. Sign removal. Manual checks that would seem fussy to someone who never saw a neck break because someone glanced up at the wrong second. Maria Hill ran a list: personal phones, cruiser dash cams, traffic cams along the transfer road, private security cams facing the road. Peggy and Steve signed paper orders that allowed seizure of data for a limited time. Stark wrote code that knocked on 100 doors and asked politely with forged credentials. The code never looked at any images. It just burned the index and salted the drive with meaningless noise. SHIELD agents walked into 2 bodegas and 1 feed store and took a single hard drive home with polite words and receipts. They swapped in new drives at once. The owners received apologies and handshakes. The agents carried the old drives in bags that had dull cloth liners. No light would bounce from those bags. Smart. I did my own sweep. It was quiet and surgical. A farmhouse 8 miles off had a hobbyist with a bird-watching rig that took a single long-lens shot of the sky. The angle was wrong. The hood wasn't visible. Still, I reached into the wire and nudged the bit pattern. The file corrupted. The man would blame a power flicker. He would not lose sleep. A hiker had a GoPro strapped to a chest harness. It had pointed at the ground during a stumble near the treeline. It recorded leaves, boots, a snake, and the sound of 066 saying Eric. I put a finger into the radio space and held the built-in wireless off until the hiker forgot to upload. Then I touched the battery and dropped the charge to 0. The hiker cursed at the device, shook it, smacked it against a rock, and put it in a pocket. He took a picture of a cloud with his phone and smiled. Good. 2 state troopers had dash cams. Their sergeant on the radio told them to pull their fuses and turn their cars off. They did. One of them muttered about paperwork. The other laughed and said it beat a funeral. I liked that man and wished him an easy night. Back in the sub-level, Peggy stood with Hill and a containment tech and reviewed the paper after action. She circled one line: locker left open. She did not raise her voice. She underlined the sentence twice. Fix, she said. Now. Yes, Director, the tech said, face pale. He ran down the hall at a quick clip, grabbed a supervisor, and pointed at the locker. The supervisor put a padlock on it and wrote discipline on a form. The tech signed and swallowed hard. He went back to work with his jaw tight. He would not forget again. Steve stood at the top of the sub-level stairs and guarded the passage like a friendly door. Agents went up and down past him. He gave each a short word if they wanted one. Good work. Thank you. Get water. He meant each one. That language did better work than most speeches. People straightened a little and moved easier. The operator inside the cell anteroom lifted his finger and pointed at the page again. The pencil line read asleep. Peggy exhaled once, chest easing. Good, she said softly. She rested her hand against the door frame. She did not lean. She was not tired yet. She would be later. She budgeted her weight the way she budgeted money. I enjoyed that thought and smiled again. Rogers, Peggy said, tone shifting to brisk. You and I will draft the emergency protocol for this class. No screens. No face. Manual doors. Paper chains. We will send copies to every regional. No delays. She glanced at Stark. We will accept your help, if you can keep your toys in the box. Stark held up both hands. Analog all the way. I can draw straight lines with a ruler. Use a pencil, she said. I own a pencil, he said. Somewhere. Steve grinned and put a hand on Peggy's shoulder. We'll start in the conference room, he said happily. I'll make coffee. You make coffee that removes paint, Peggy said. I will make tea. Coffee for me, Hill said. I like paint thinner. Of course you do, Natasha said, walking past. She had changed her shirt. She had a hood in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. She smelled faintly of cold air and pine. She tapped the hood against her leg. Box holds. I'm going to circle the woods. Take 2, Peggy said. Natasha nodded. Wilson is outside. Good, Peggy said. Go. Natasha left with a quick wave that was almost a salute and not quite. Sam Wilson fell in beside her on the surface with his gear folded. His smile was easy and quick. We're taking a jog. Quiet jog, Natasha said. No chatter. Copy, he said. He adjusted his wings down to a low glide and let the straps hum. He liked the feel of air. He did not brag about it. I walked the ceiling once more and then stepped out into the cold night. I stood on the hill and watched the fence line. Crickets worked. A truck on the distant road blew a low horn and kept going. The stars sat over the treetops. The facility glowed faintly at the vents. Inside, 096 slept. The pencil wrote the word again with a small line. The operator marked time. The room held still. I checked the multiverse. The daybreak grid ran clean. Superior Earth logged no deaths after midnight. The other deployments on my board reported their own numbers. Some fights. 3 breaches. All contained. 2 anomalies evolved in unexpected directions. Both contained. I logged them for study. The overall curve stayed within plan. That made my smile wider for a second. Then I smoothed it again. I followed the fiber path out of the facility and into the nearest hub and turned off the last unmarked camera at a highway exchange. I broke its memory. I logged the location for a physical visit later. I made a note to myself to build a cleaner pipeline for this universe's public cameras so Peggy's people wouldn't drown in requests. I would keep it quiet. No speeches. Just less work for the right people. Near dawn, Steve and Peggy came out of the conference room with a stack of paper. Steve carried the heavy end. Peggy carried the important end. Their faces were calm and set. Small lines around Steve's eyes said he was tired and pleased with the work. Peggy's mouth had softened while she wrote. She hid it when she stepped into the hall. She had set her hair back with a clip that had come loose. Steve reached to fix it and then put his hand down. She fixed it herself without looking. They moved in step without thinking. Draft ready, Peggy said to Hill. Send to legal, Hill replied, taking the stack. Then to field. I'll head off the 3 loudest complaints. Thank you, Peggy said. Steve reached for his pocket and then remembered the bin. He laughed softly. I forgot we gave our phones to the nice man with the ledger. I issued you a travel notebook, Peggy said. She handed him a small spiral pad and a pencil. Write down your thoughts like a proper adult. My thoughts, he said, making a face that was all grin. Dangerous. Not if I read them first, she said. He laughed again, light and open. He tucked the pad into his jacket. He looked at the cell door and gave it a respectful nod. Sleep well, he said, conversational, as if the box could hear and would be less angry later for it. We're working on better boxes. I tested the box with a thin tap of pressure against each bolt. The steel did not move. The foam inside did not compress. The lid stayed flush. The air pipe flowed at the set rate. Everything was clean. I felt a small satisfaction settle deep in me. It was heavy enough to notice and light enough not to change my step. I left the facility and moved into the sky. I took one last look back at the small red bulb over the cell. It glowed steady. The guard at the ledger turned a page and sharpened his pencil with a knife. The sound was quick and rough. He blew the shavings into his hand and put them in his pocket. He liked clean floors. He liked his job. He would tell his wife he did paperwork all night and that it was dull. He would not be lying. I let that thought sit and then let it go. The sun pushed a thin pale line over the trees. I felt the multiverse pull. Work waited on the other side. I took one more breath of the air here. It smelled like rain and oil and tea and a pencil shaving. I grinned at the smell and then stepped out of the sky. Chapter 22, 10 Lights and a Broken God. I left Peggy's facility with the red bulb steady and the pencil still scratching. The air here had done its work. It was clean and simple. I let that good feeling ride with me into the fold. I stepped through with an easy push and set my course along a line of pressure that felt rude and loud, which is how some universes announce their biggest problem. I smiled. I like clear problems. They put the day in order. The new universe met me with hard light and empty space. I emerged above a pale blue gas giant with a ring like a highway. The ring spread in a wide flat plain, lit by a white sun that sat far away and burned with a neat output curve. The background hum of this reality shook against my chest in a steady rhythm. I tasted it. It was a big place, loud with power and louder with pride. The first thing I saw was the gauntlet. It wasn't subtle. It gleamed like a tool room. A massive hand covered in dark metal flexed above the ring plane. 10 stones set into it in 2 bands burned in 10 precise colors. The bands weren't sloppy. They were built with engineering. Each stone sat in its own housing with reinforced filaments linking to the next. The filaments pulsed. The band flexed when the fingers flexed. That detail made me grin. Thanos floated at the center of his own gravity, chest bare, skin the color of dried bruise, eyes deep and bright. He was not dead here. He was not chasing. He was finished with chasing. He looked like a man who had found every piece on the board and built a new board. His jaw was set in the same thick line I knew. His mouth moved once, just enough to show he was amused. He had always liked theater in small doses. He raised the loaded hand and tested it with a small flick. Space wrinkled 10 different ways and then flattened. He nodded slightly, pleased. Balanced, he said in a calm voice that carried in vacuum because the stones made him heard wherever he wanted to be heard. Across from him, above the ring, something else waited with less vanity and more teeth. SCP-2399 hung there like a dead star that had refused to stay dead. It was a machine the size of a city, built for war and built correctly. Its hull wore scars. Whole sections had been replaced with mismatched parts cannibalized from itself. The central array turned in quiet circles and never clicked out of sync. A dozen long guns lined one armature, and a swarm of repair drones moved like silver insects around damaged panels. It pointed nothing at anyone yet. It watched. It measured. I settled above the plane, a little off-center, and went invisible. I rolled my shoulders and relaxed my hands. I didn't feel any need to posture. I was in a good mood. I love watching a plan and a problem meet halfway. If my creature broke or my plan bent too far, I would put my hand in the mess and clean it. But for now, I watched. Thanos lifted his chin and spoke as if to himself. A machine that thinks it knows war. The stones hummed. He rotated his wrist. And 10 reasons it learns. SCP-2399 answered by not answering. It moved energy from one armature to another. It pulled mass from the ring with clean beams and reprinted a missing plate on a secondary gun. The drones clicked back into their hives and the guns tracked 2 degrees to intercept course. The central brain, the part foundation files labeled as a command cluster with distributed logic, made 9 projections in 9 microseconds and threw away 6. It chose a line and loaded the weapon that matched it. Calm. Efficient. Very good. I felt my mouth lift higher. I kept the smile. I like a fight that starts with quiet. Thanos fired the first test. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a thin beam of sickly light from one stone that wrote a line in space. Where the line passed, time shuddered and went slow. The beam reached the rim of 2399's outer plates and licked them. Panels flexed. Drones died and then didn't. The machine jerked once and then adjusted. It spun a disk and dumped the local time into a holding field that a second array ate like fuel. Good. It had eaten worse. Thanos nodded. He liked being impressed. He didn't show surprise. 2399 returned fire. A petal-shaped structure opened on its dorsal plate and spat projectiles in a tight, ugly pattern. They weren't pretty. They were dense. They hit with kinetic, microwave, and non-lethal logic noise, tuned to fry nervous systems in organisms and destabilize alloys in certain ranges. Thanos wasn't in those ranges. He crossed his arms and took the first volley on the loaded gauntlet. The stones flared. Force dissipated and went somewhere else. He didn't even bump. He spoke, low and calm. We start simple. He raised 2 fingers. The rings on one band lit. Gravity turned on its side. The ring field buckled like a carpet kicked from one end. Shards of ice and rock spun up in corkscrews and hammered into 2399's middle plates. The machine responded by locking to the gas giant's field generator line and borrowing more pull than it should have had access to. It held position and spread the blow along its truss. 6 guns shook. 1 broke. Drones poured into the break and welded. Blue sparks marked their paths. The break sealed. The plates smoked. The machine marked the gauntlet's pull as a hazard and cut a hole around that hazard so the next time the pull came, it would have somewhere to go. It shot back again. This time the guns spoke with microwave blades that sliced through empty space. They weren't made for men. They were made for starships. They crossed Thanos at lung height and knee height. He dropped into the cut and let the lower blade pass. He made a small noise of satisfaction. The upper blade rolled off the stones and split into 3 sheets of frost that drifted away. He brushed the frost away with annoyance and flicked his other wrist. Color in the other band burned. That band wasn't familiar. The pulses looked wrong and new. If I had been new to Thanos, I would have called it a trick. I'm not new. I recognized a hand that had used one system and then taught itself a different system because one wasn't enough. He had stones that didn't belong to roads I knew. He'd pulled them from corners where no one cleans. That made my skin hum a little harder. I like novelty. A thin ripple ran through 2399's hull. For 1 second, the guns heated red and then cooled. For 1 second, the central logic stuttered and double wrote a stack and then cleaned it up. A lesser machine would have eaten its own memory. 2399 stuttered again, labeled the ripple as a curse, and built a box around it. It pumped the curse into empty space and tagged any similar signature as waste. It got back to work. That earned a small warm flush in my chest. Good machine. Thanos tilted his head and gave a very small smile. He liked it too, but not for the same reason. He liked a wall that didn't fall when first touched. He enjoyed the second push more that way. He lifted his chin a fraction and spoke as if listing groceries. Space. Time. Change. Want. Mind. Soul. The primary band pulsed once in slow order. He moved to the other band. Dream. Death. War. Heart. That band thrummed in an order that didn't map to any old charts. He had found names for things that mortals had no business naming. He had burned those names into stones and now wore them on his wrist like jewelry. He rotated his shoulders. He punched nothing. A cone of emptiness launched from his fist and ate the ring for 10 kilometers. Debris went to dust in a neat wedge. 2399 leaned out of the cone's edge and fired a dozen lines into it to test what the emptiness ate and what it burped. 2 lines vanished. 10 lines came back distorted and hot. The machine reweighted its tables and made a note to not send living drones into that shape. It pulled 4 drones back that had been stupid because they had been new. It melted them and used their mass to make smarter drones. That tiny predator behavior pleased me. Thanos noticed the recycle and grunted, not angry, just interested. He lifted his empty hand. No stones there. He closed it and pulled at nothing. Something answered. His fingers came up with a cold light that hung like a coin above his palm. It looked like a star. He crushed it to dust and smeared that dust across the ring of stones. The pulse it threw off made the gas giant below complain with a long, low tremor. He pointed 2 fingers at the machine and fired that pulse like a bullet. It crossed the distance with no waste. It struck 2399's central axle. The axle glowed white for 1 second and showed its internal structure like bone under a scan. I saw the heart of the broken god exposed, all cogs and logic and old will. It let me see it and didn't flinch. Then it smoothed it again. The axle shook once more. The machine shed 3 old plates like dead skin and let them fall into the gas giant's field. It printed new plates in correct sizes and attached them with clean, unburned welds. Thanos watched all that with his head tilted. He liked being admired even when no one said it. He took pleasure in the way things fixed themselves before he broke them again. I watched his eyes. No madness now. No froth. He was in full control. He wanted the machine and then wanted it gone. He liked doing both at the same time. I shifted my stance and flexed my fingers. If the machine failed, I would carve the man open and take the bands. I would not let this version of him walk past my gate with that hand still moving. The thought didn't harden me. It steadied me. I felt cheerful. It is easy to be kind when you can be cruel and do not need to be. 2399 changed phase. It stopped trading shots and turned its central array to a configuration I only saw in certain files. The array spun faster. Shield plates slid. The dorsal gun bloomed like a trumpet. The logic in its spine loaded a template that had killed a city once. The machine didn't hurry. It counted, waited for Thanos to stop testing, and then put a hole in space at a fixed coordinate beside his left shoulder. Not at him. Beside him. The hole formed and then inverted. Everything in a shallow cone tore sideways. Thanos snapped his loaded hand up on reflex. He deflected half. The other half grabbed his shoulder and tried to pull it out of socket. He grunted as his chest plate tore and skin parted. Dark blood drifted. The stones flashed, not in perfect unity, but in a scramble like a fight at a switchboard. He grabbed the torn skin with his other hand, pressed it down human hard, and healed it with a ripple from 2 of the new band stones. He timed it correctly. He didn't overheal. He left a line. He believed in scars as memory. He did not smile that time. He respected that hit. Good, he said. Calm. Measured. He turned his hand and reset his target list. 2399 didn't bask. It fired 3 more cones, each at a different offset, each with a different frequency. It was mapping his responses. It would build a system and then break it and build a better one. The 3rd cone caught a forearm hair and turned it to dust for no reason except to test change at that scale. It wasn't petty. It was thorough. That thoroughness made something inside me ease, like a joint that had been tight and then loosened. Thanos punished it for the cones. He set 3 stones space, war, and whatever sat in the new band where humans put the word heart to pulse together. The space in front of his fist condensed and hardened, then launched like a steel bar. It was nothing like the comic blasts. It was a club made of rules and intent. It hit 2399's dorsal gun and smashed it flat. The shock ran down the truss and broke 3 struts. Plates fell off like teeth, Drones tried to catch them and failed. The machine lost 90 seconds rebuilding load-bearing lines. It did it fast, but not fast enough to make the loss invisible. He kept hitting the truss. He liked the sound. He liked how machines complained when he treated them like meat. He walked forward in the air with measured steps. Every step accelerated him by a percentage that would have liquefied a man who wasn't him. The stones carried the load. He did not tire. 2399 recognized the hate for trusses and built a fake. It printed a decoy support in bright armor and left a real one behind dark plates. He hit the decoy and laughed when it peeled off like tin. He didn't fall for it twice. He hit the real one next and broke it anyway. The machine repaired anyway. This rhythm repeated with variations. He would not stop. It could not be bored. They were well matched that way. He brought in the new stones again. He pulsed war with death and something in the blue register that mapped to dream. A local section of the ring plane fell asleep. I watched a kilometer of rock and ice go slack. Gravity stopped acting on the slack matter with correct vigor. It drooped in a way nothing in space should droop. 2399 shot it to pieces and used the debris for shield fill. It did not let a small field lie change basic work. He sneered, the first show of emotion beyond pleasure. He murmured, not enough, as if to a pet. He turned on all 10 lights and wrote a web around his target. The web collapsed. It wasn't an explosion. It was a change in arrangement. 2399 vanished on one map and reappeared on another because the first map was gone. He tried to cancel a coordinate from existing. He pulled the page out of the book and showed me his empty palm. He waited to see if I would be impressed. I raised my chin and made a soft, pleased sound in my throat that no one but me heard. 2399 wasn't where he expected because it wasn't moving like a thing with a fixed spine anymore. It dropped the spine. It poured its mind into drones that had become less drone-like with every failure. He erased a thing. The thing changed into an argument made up of components that didn't line up with the eraser. It rebuilt 2399 300 meters to starboard and 20 meters out of phase with the initial rules he'd applied. Its guns fired from that wrong phase and hit him in the ribs. The hit rocked him. He brought his hand down in pure rage for a single breath and then bit the rage off. He smoothed himself. He does that. He didn't like that it had made him feel anything. He looked at the band of old stones, then the band of new stones. He made a choice. He took the primary band offline for 3 seconds and beat the machine with the stones no cosmologist had ever taught me. I felt that. I felt it like a pressure change. The new lights burned too clean. They weren't born from the places the last 6 had come from. They felt like cheat code written by a man who never played by rules and now had his own carnival. He pulled lines from ideas that didn't give permission easily. He used those lines with full hands. The gas giant complained again. Its outer bands jumped like muscle under a nerve test. The ring plane shrieked without sound. 2399's logic tagged 5 new hazards. One hazard got a name in its books, Dream. I watched it write that in a steady mark. It puts names in its files too. It uses them to win. He made the guns dream they were soft. 2 guns went limp and fell. He made the repair drones dream they liked him. 10 drones climbed his arm and tried to fix the seam on his chest. He crushed 9 without thinking. He kept one in his palm and looked at it with rare affection. You know your work, he said. He shredded it anyway because that amused him. He tried to make the central array dream it was not here. It refused. It had been here for longer than he had been alive in this cut of the multiverse. It had killed cities and had lost pieces and had learned from it. It had a spine that was not in any one part. It made him work. I let myself chuckle once. I couldn't help it. I like stubborn machines. I like stubborn men too. Stubborn makes the day honest. Thanos stopped playing at the wrist and changed his body. He pressed his feet into nothing and gained a stance. He put his shoulders over his hips. He fought like a man who'd learned to box at the end of the world and taken that form into godhood. He jabbed a hole through the wrong phase space with a two-stone punch. He hit the central array with the follow and broke the faceplate. The core leaked light in a way engineers hate to see. He reached for the leak. An armature from nowhere stopped his wrist. 2399 had kept one gun back, not to fire, but to block. It had printed it without a barrel. It was a simple lever with reinforcement that matched his vector. He had torn out its main defense by reading. It had built one he couldn't read without a tell. He bared his teeth without joy. He pulled his wrist back and slammed into it again. It held. He rotated under. It adapted. They traded simple ugly contacts for a minute that would have ground a mountain to powder. I leaned a little forward. My fingers flexed. My good mood stayed. My chest warmed. I like that sound. Arm against arm. Equation against equation. No lyrics. Just work. He got tired first. Not physically. Mentally. He despised objects that made him operate at their level. He wanted to be cleverer at a distance. He wanted to be above. The machine had dragged him into a short ring. He did not like learning there. He stepped back 1 meter and switched to a light he hadn't used yet. The death stone on the new band pulsed. This wasn't the old black gem I knew. This was a pristine square that didn't flicker. He fired it in a line. 2399's repair drones died in flight and didn't reboot. The panel they carried fell and spun. He fired again. 2 armatures went grey. Power didn't flow through them anymore. He fired a third time. A new logic cluster on the machine's back stuttered and stopped. That wasn't fair and it worked. The machine did not complain. It dropped the dead, reweighted the load again, and shifted its core into a sealed chamber inside a ring that had layers. He burned one. It moved under the next. It built sacrificial logic stacks and fed them to the line that was killing its mind so that the line would be busy eating while it wrote new stacks. It built from the edge inward. It bought itself minutes that way. He tried to take those minutes. He closed his hand. The 10 lights sang. The ring groaned in a low way that said not long. He set the stones to sing again and wrote a message into the giant sky that said surrender. The machine did not read it. He snarled. He went to the old stones and brought space, time, and change back online with a disregard for subtle order. They listened, because they always do when someone strong has them in a band. He twisted the field and pushed. He turned 1 second into 10 where the machine had to repair a truss. Drones finished and used the extra seconds to make new drones. He went to change again and turned the alloy in a patch to chalk. The drones saw the change and flushed the chalk into the gas giant and printed a patch that didn't take that change easily. He tricked. It adapted. I nodded to myself and rolled my neck. I let out a light hiss through my teeth. He wasn't getting bored, he was getting annoyed. Good. Annoyed men show how they lose. He stopped trying to erase and moved to crush. He crossed the distance with a real step and took the array in both hands. He used 10 stones to hold the plate like a man holds a jaw. He dug fingers into seams and forced them. He stopped using tricks. He used weight and will. This is what he is when the lecture ends and the act peels off. He is big. He pulls hard. If you don't break his grip, he breaks you. 2399 fought like a soldier now. It had thrown too many systems into trying to handle the new lights in clever ways and had lost enough to know that part of the fight was over. It braced. It drove a crowbar under his thumb. It didn't make noise. It worked. It made dents in his wrist and bent the band a fraction of a degree. That band wasn't his skin. It fought him. He fought the band and the machine at the same time and liked it and cursed it. He laughed once without joy. He pushed the 10 lights into a cord I didn't know yet. The cord went through 2399's hull and told it to be off by a very little amount. Its measurements went from clean to tiny dirty. It fired a gun and the gun shot 3 degrees low. It tightened a panel and the panel sat 1 millimeter proud. It still worked. It didn't like the feel. It slapped itself with logic like a sergeant and corrected the drift out of sheer contempt. He enjoyed that too and then punished it for virtue. He pulled death again and ran it as a whisper through the truss. 2 immaculate welds failed at perfect centers. He had tuned the whisper to find pride and ruin it. He smiled for real. He said one word quietly. Yield. 2399 cut its broadcast arrays in half to free mass and manifest a battering ram made from the parts. It hit him in the face with it. The blow moved his head 1 centimeter. He closed his eyes, opened them, and nodded slowly. He respected that. He tore the ram into foil and fed it to one of his stones as a snack. He was going to win at this speed. Not because the machine wasn't good. Because the stones cheated. There are fights you win because you are clever. There are fights you win because you have more tools. He had both today. 2399 would keep its pride and then break. It would take hours if I let it, and it would be a work of art to watch. I like art. I like my lattice more. I rolled my shoulders and dropped my hands. My good mood slid away as easy as a jacket off my back. My face went flat. I watched his wrist. He rolled the new lights like coins. He was about to pull a line that would cut through this ring and 100 more at a soft angle that would touch too many anchors. I would not lose anchors for this. I pulled a breath in and let it out as a scrape that shook the air around me. It sounded like laughter broken into knives. No one heard it but me. I lifted one hand and felt the right stones in his band take interest because the thing in me that eats creation now looks like a friend to them when I let it. I didn't make friends today. I pulled, fast and clean. He felt it. His eyes went wide for one honest second. He turned his head toward the place I wasn't. He didn't see me. He clenched his fist. The 10 lights roared like a choir. He tried to hang onto the band while something older and colder than him stepped on his hand and made his fingers numb. He growled low. He fought me without seeing me. I liked the weight of that. He is never weak. 2399 recognized the distortion like a soldier recognizes an artillery strike from friendly lines. It didn't cheer. It used the opening. It drove that crowbar into the seam between 2 stones like it had watched 1,000 arm wrestlers and now wanted to win one. It pried. The band screamed. A crack showed between war and death where the housings met. The filaments sparked. The machine threw everything into that crack for 1 exact second, then stopped, then threw again on a different cycle to avoid the recovery pulse designed to punish linear persistence. It had learned him. It made him work on 2 schedules at once. He hates that. He fought me and the machine. His face went hard and slow. He made the smart choice. He let go of the move that would have ruined my ring for a dozen anchors. He saved his hand and his weapon. He gave up the quick win. He threw the machine away from his chest with 30% of his 10 lights behind a cattle prod tremor that would have killed a sun whale. 2399 tumbled. It cut the tumble into neat segments with small building jets. It bled mass to do that. It saved itself. It lost pace. He hung in the air and rolled his hand. He flexed each finger. He looked at nothing and said nothing. He took that 1 second to count. I kept my hand lifted. I let my face smooth back into light cheer. I like a man who knows when he should stop trying to be a statement and start being a problem again. He had almost been a statement. I had almost taken the stones from him like a baker takes a knife from a child. I smiled and dropped my hand. The machine recovered to a near-ready stance 400 meters out. It printed 3 jets, killed 2, kept 1, and then pretended to have 2 to bait another cone. It isn't petty. It's professional. I like professionals. Thanos looked at the band and at the machine and then at the gas giant that had complained twice. He had learned enough about both to either commit or leave. He is not a coward. He is exactly the kind of practical that keeps empires from burning too fast. He pulled breath in. He let it out. He curled his lip. He lowered his hand. Another time, he said. No drama. No insult. He rolled the primary stones once more out of habit, a man checking keys in a pocket. He cut space in a clean line and stepped through it. The 10 lights went with him. The line sealed behind his heel. The ring stopped whining. The gas giant smoothed in patient circles. I held my cheer thin and steady. I did not follow him. His exit vector told me the next place he wanted to make a boast. It wasn't near an anchor. He would live until I needed him dead. That wasn't mercy. That was schedule. I turned toward 2399 and dropped out of concealment. I let my weight touch the ring plane enough to sink a centimeter into the soft bits and then rose again. I lifted my palm in a small greeting. It rotated an armature 3 degrees toward me. It didn't waste bullets testing me. It scanned and recorded and found graphs it didn't like. It labeled me anomaly, high. It wrote do not engage in a neat thin line in a part of its memory no one but it would be allowed to edit. I hissed softly. Pleased. Good work, I said in a thin scrape that wasn't for it. It would not understand speech. It understood outcomes. It had achieved the right one. It turned 2 degrees back to the rebuild and resumed repairs. I stayed with it for an hour and watched drones rest edge plates in patterns that would hold up to Thanos' next angle if he came back in a week and not today. It printed a new gun with the correct slope to throw a cone into the shoulder and not the ribs. It reset 3 logic stacks to be sacrificial. It wrote a memo to itself about Dream that made me laugh again because of how dry it was. I like a machine that writes memos with dry humor. When it was done with the immediate work, it went back to long maintenance like nothing had happened. I took that as the signal to step away. I floated above the ring one last time and let the memory settle, a man with 2 bands of lights, a machine with a spine in 1,000 pieces, and a plan that held. My hand hovered in the air and then dropped. I felt the edges of my mood break back into light. Daybreak would not be bent by this. My lattice would not pay for his experiment. The anchors still sang. The gates stayed in tune. The machine would be here the next time, stronger, and if it failed, I would be there, closer, and the 10 lights would come off a purple hand and go into a red box. I turned and stepped out of the sky. Chapter 23, 2 jumps and a quiet net. I left the ring field with my mood light and my plan straight. Thanos had pulled out with 10 stones in 2 bands. He would test those bands where the yield was high and the risk was low. He would not aim at an anchor next. He would go gather and tune. I followed the exit vector he left behind. The trail was clean and strong. The stones made a stain in the fold that held shape for hours. I moved with no trail of my own. My field stayed cold. My plating sat quiet. The space between universes bent and opened. I stepped through and into hard air. The new reality was loud in the way of industrial work. No cities. No fields. No here hung in the dark. The skull of a dead celestial turned slow above a belt of scrap and drilling platforms. Floodlights cut clean shapes across bone. Gantries crawled. Refinery stacks vented in steady columns. Shuttles ran in lines from dock to dig and back again. It smelled of oil and acid. That smell carries even in vacuum when the work is this heavy. I stood 50 kilometers out and watched. A gate line opened without fanfare at the top of the skull. Thanos stepped out with his band still warm from the last use. He wore no armor now. He did not need it. His left hand hung open with the primary stones. His right wore the new ones. The metal around them looked fresh from adjustment. He had set the housings a fraction tighter. He trusted his own hands. He did not trust the maker of the band. 3 figures waited on the dorsal pad. Ebony Maw stood with his hands folded. His head bent. His voice carried without strain. "Your wool arrives." He meant to flatter. He did not overdo the tone. He had learned that Thanos had no patience for theater during work. Proxima Midnight stood to the side with her spear planted and her chin raised. Corvus Glaive stood in shadow and looked along the line of the dock with flat, hard eyes. Supergiant lounged on a container with a mouth that was almost a smile and a look that weighed every mind on the pad. Cull Obsidian was not here. He was not the tool for this place. Thanos descended the steps with steady feet. "Status," he said. "Nothing more." Maw bowed slightly. "Extraction continuous. Celestial marrow yields. The veins your hand woke have not closed." Proxima nodded once. "Security is quiet." She did not waste words. Corvus watched 4 mercenaries on the far side of the pad count crates without counting correctly. He did not comment yet. He filed it. Thanos walked to the edge and looked down into the skull. His face held no awe. He did not speak to the dead. He held his hands behind his back and observed equipment in motion. He watched 3 lifts rise and descend. He watched 1 jam. He watched a foreman fix it. He watched 2 drones carry a severed horn onto a barge and winch it into place for milling. He nodded once when the barge did not pitch under the weight. He turned his head. "Clear the dig below the optic cavity," he said. Maw lifted one hand and gestured. He enjoyed the gesture but kept it short. He spoke into a quiet channel. Platforms moved. Workers pulled back. Lifts froze and waited. Thanos lowered his right hand. The new stones answered with a heat I did not like. He pressed them against the bone. The surface groaned. A seam opened along a plane that was not visible before. The marrow under it pulsed black and bright in turns. He reached in and pulled matter no one else could touch. He did not strain. He stacked it in the air and let it float. Supergiant watched with interest. Her tone was soft. "The dead god knows your hand." Thanos did not answer. He rotated the mass in front of him. He tapped 1 stone. The mass hardened. He tapped another. It sighed and settled. The tone of the skull changed when he worked. It ran under the feet on the dock. Maw's eyes warmed. He liked when the world obeyed. Proxima set her spear behind her boot and waited for orders. Corvus caught the mercenaries cheating the count and said nothing. He would cut them later, not now. I stood off and built a map of the new band behavior. Dream bent deep matter. Death stilled active fields without drop. War made carrier waves that thrilled at impact. Heart carried a thread that tracked will as a function. He was using them with care. He had tuned the set with this work in mind. He meant to build something more than a fist. He worked for an hour. He harvested 3 loads. He sealed the seam with a light touch after the 3rd. He did not over-harvest. He had patience when it paid. He gestured to Maw without looking at him. "Send to forge. Shield the feed with the pattern I used for the 2nd set." Maw's hands moved. At once. Supergiant tilted her head. "You overprotect." Thanos turned his eyes on her. No, he did not explain. She dipped her head and grinned without teeth. She liked when she hit the wall. Proxima touched her comm and listened to 2 reports. Traffic is clean. No watchers. The Guardians are off-world. The Nova are arguing with themselves in public. Thanos looked down into the skull one more time, not searching, just storing the view. He stepped back to the pad. He did not look at Ma. We move. Ma's face brightened with quiet hunger. To the foundry. No, Thanos said. He lifted his chin a fraction. To a warehouse. He meant a reality that held inventory. He did not say where in words. He put it in the stones and moved. He cut space in a thin line and walked through with the Black Order behind him. I followed. The new universe was cold and dim. It held a grid of dead suns and humming factories that never opened. It had been made for a war and the war had missed it. The warehouses were full. The air smelled clean. The corridors ran on straight tracks with no art. Thanos walked down one and the lights woke in front of him. He did not slow. The Black Order fanned out without hand signals. They had repeated this pattern with him for years. They did not think about it. They did it. The doors along the corridor read his band and opened. He looked into each and took nothing. He went to the last door and set his hand on the panel. It scanned him and found nothing it would override. The door slid aside. Inside, a field held a mass in suspension. It was a raw shape. It had not had a name yet. He raised the new stones and rotated the mass. He looked at it from 3 axes. He held it in place and let his left hand draw lines on it with the old band. The lines sank into the mass and changed it. Ma leaned forward without moving his feet. The frame, he said, a whisper of awe. He loved frames. He loved when a plan had bones he could see. Thanos set the mass down on a cradle. It hummed. He stepped back. He flexed his fingers and rolled his wrists. He turned to the door. We move, he said again. No flourish. He had what he wanted from this place. Proxima moved with him. Corvus slipped out of the shadow and paced his right hand without noise. Supergiant walked last and touched 2 minds in 2 rooms and smiled because both felt small. Ma lifted his hands without meaning to and then set them flat along his sides to hide the motion. They stepped through a line and into the fold. I stood in the door they left, walked to the cradle, and looked at the mass Thanos had settled. It held the shape of an armor core without skin. It was light and dense at once. It wore traces of the new stones. He had a plan that needed a body. He did not mean to put the new band on the existing gauntlet forever. He meant to split the load. He meant to not lose everything if one band failed. He had already adjusted for a scenario where the stones parted company under stress. He was not careless. He had built many losses into wins. I left the chamber as it had been and slipped into their trail again. The second jump ended over a blinding star for 1 heartbeat and then slid into empty dark that sat heavy and clean. The place had been cleared by someone that paid attention to dust. I crouched at the edge of the fold and stayed still. Thanos floated over the shell of a dead celestial. The head had been removed. Only the ribs remained. The ribs held green fire in hairline cracks. The cracks moved. He raised the new band with respect, not worship. He spoke quietly. You have value. He set the stones into a low hum that did not travel. The cracks flared. The ribs shifted. The fire ran into the new band in a steady line. He let it. He kept the line clean. He did not rush. He took the charge and stored it. He did not spend it. Ma watched his hand with a face that was almost tender. Proxima watched the space behind Thanos for movement and saw none. Corvus scanned the shadow of a rib and settled. Supergiant pressed her palms together and grinned. She liked green fire that moved along smooth. They took 12 minutes to fill a reservoir. Thanos closed his hand. He looked left and right. He tilted his head and listened to the stones. He nodded once. He turned. "We move," he said for the third time. "Where?" Proxima asked quietly. "A test," he said. "Calm. No more." They cut the fold and stepped through. I stepped with them and kept my field pressed against the seam. The next universe was busy and bright. The Sovereign drifted in its long gold lines. The main palace ship moved with low thrust. The air around the fleet hummed with carrier waves that sang praise to themselves. Priests walked balconies with smooth feet. Aisha stood at the prow and held her chin high. Her eyes tracked the world with cold calculation that never slept. She held a data slate in one hand and a cup of clear liquid in the other. The Sovereign noticed the gate and rolled formation with clean discipline. A net of fighters spread along arcs. Thanos hovered a comfortable distance from the front line. He did not raise his voice. He did not bow. He remained exactly still. Aisha's mouth flattened with irritation she did not allow onto her voice. "You trespass." Thanos answered with a neutral tone. "I do not trespass. I pass through." He raised his hand and left it at shoulder height. He did not point it. He kept it still. The 10 stones stayed dark. Aisha's eyes glanced at the Black Order. She read the weapons and the lines. She adjusted her plan in one breath. "You will state your terms," she said. "None," Thanos said. He turned his head a fraction and looked into empty space where no eyes saw anything. He held that look for one count. He had felt me. He did not know where I was. He smiled without amusement. He turned back to Aisha. "If I wanted what you hold, I would take it and you would catalogue the loss and add a footnote about your pride." Her nostrils flared. Her mouth opened. She closed it. She turned her head a fraction and made a signal with one finger. Fighters moved aside. A path opened. Thanos nodded at her without warmth and stepped along the path without changing his distance. He kept his hands still. He did not step toward the palace. He stepped past. I watched the new band. The stones were quiet. He had no interest in staging a lesson here. He used the Sovereign to see if I would break cover to protect them. I did not break cover. I smiled to myself and felt my breath go easy. He cut another line and moved. The third jump tipped toward one of my anchor bands by a small angle. He did not aim for it yet. He would swing wide and test the edges. I adjusted course to keep inside his shadow. I built the ambush in my head. First, isolate the new band signature. Second, jam the handshake those stones used to keep their harmony. Third, split the band from the wrist and hold it in a controlled frame. Fourth, cut his options to swap hands. Fifth, if he stayed to fight, kill him. If he ran, let him, after the new stones left his possession. I did not intend to damage the old band today. Space, time, and change made noise when they resisted. That noise could crack an anchor if the field was wrong. The new band had no such tie to any of my structures. I could pull them clean without cost. I seated the net while I moved. It took 3 passes to lay it exactly. I placed 4 silent frames in the folds ahead of him. Each frame locked to one of his new stones. The locks used pressure lines those stones could not hear because they did not come out of the same ladder of laws. I tuned the frames to stay dormant until all 4 stones crossed a box the size of a small room. He would not see the box. He would move into it when he lined up a wide-angle move. He used the same stance for those. I had watched it on the ring. He made that stance at the edge of an empty corridor between realities. He opened his hand wide to pull a seam across a field that would have nicked the far side of one of my anchors if I had allowed the motion to go to full. The frames woke. Dream went first. The frame slotted around it and sanded off the edges of its broadcast. The stone tried to sing. The frame damped the sound into a low thud that went nowhere. Death tried to turn the frame off. The frame took the turn and stored it as fuel. War tried to punch through. The frame had no surface for that punch. Heart tried to track me. The frame fed it false lines. The stone lost its taste of me and grabbed at a shadow. Thanos felt all of that. He clenched his hand. The 10 lights flared. The old band woke with a warning tone. He cut the broad move before it reached the anchor edge. He changed stance. He shifted his weight. He pulled the old band up to block and the new band into shield. The frames pressed in at the wrist. They were not metal. He could not break them. He widened his eyes for 1 second and laughed once. It was not happy. It was honest. He spoke without raising his voice. There you are. He rotated his shoulders. He rolled both wrists. He braced his feet against nothing. He used the old band to force the space around his hand to act like steel. He tried to pry the frames open by turning the space itself. I compressed the frames by a hair. The stones complained. The sound did not cross into any world. I kept it there. I stepped out of the fold and stood 10 meters away. My field unmasked. My plating burned a steady red. The light under my skin turned gold in lines. He looked at me, not at the light. His mouth did not move for 2 seconds. Then he spoke in a calm tone. You again. I gave a short scrape from my throat. The sound had humor in it. I lifted my hand and spread my fingers. The frames tightened. The stones in the new band lost more motion. He tilted his head. You waited until you had need. He approved of that. He lifted his left hand and the old band flared. Do not reach for this one. I did not. I kept my eyes on the right hand. He shifted his stance. He considered options. He would try something new in the next 3 moves. I put heat into the frames equal to what he could handle without risking a spill into any system I cared about. Ma spoke into Thanos' ear from a long way away, because he was not here. Sire. Silence, Thanos said. It was not angry. It was weight. He used space to cut a seam under my feet. I stepped across the seam and onto hard nothing. He used time to double my last motion. The frame on Dream took the copy and ate it. He used change to try to make the frames care about a thing he could break. They did not. He tried again with death. The frame hummed and pulled in the strike. He changed to war and tried to make my frames love striking. He did not know how the frames were built. He could not seduce them. They were not born in a place his stones knew. He dropped the tricks. He put both hands forward and tried to tear my head off with pressure and aim. He failed. I reached and closed my fingers around his right wrist. The contact burned me in the way that happens when 2 systems refuse to share. My plating protested. I held. I pushed his hand down to waist height. He resisted. We both locked. He looked me in the eye. His breath stayed steady. He smiled once, small and thin. You will kill me if I resist. I pushed his wrist down another inch. My voice came out in a hard screech that did not carry words. It carried agreement. He nodded. Then I do not resist, he said. He lied in the next half second, because in that half second he used the old band to blind me with a wall of pure push. He meant to make me tighten the frames on the new band too far, to crack them and lose control. I did not tighten. I let the push pass. The frames held. I squeezed a fraction harder on his right wrist. He stopped the lie. He watched my face. He rolled both shoulders. He accepted the next step. I peeled the new band from his hand. It did not slide. It tore hair and skin. The housings cried in a tone only stones make. He did not flinch. He did not make a sound. He let me take them because to fight here would cost him the old band, his life, or both. He set his jaw. He kept his back straight. He did nothing dramatic. He cut his losses. He had learned that from years of work. The band came free. The frames folded and wrapped it. I closed my hand around the folded net. The 4 new stones beat against my palm. They tried to find each other without the band. I did not let them. I set each in its own tight room. They could not hear their siblings. They could not sing to the old band. They could not speak to Thanos. They went silent. He looked at my hand and then at his. His right wrist bled old blood in a thin line. He looked at the blood with no interest. He lifted his left hand, checked the old stones by touch, and lowered it. He took one deep, even breath. His eyes cleared of a heat that had not been there before the frames woke. He nodded once. He did not say thank you. He would never say that. He looked at my face and said in a plain tone, "You hate waste." I let my mouth lift a fraction. I liked the accuracy. I gave a short hiss that carried agreement without words. He turned his head to the side. He listened to Ma, who had not spoken, but who was present in the band. Thanos said one word. Retreat. Then he looked at me again. We will play at ring work another day. He cut a line with the old stones and stepped into it. He moved very carefully. He did not test me during the exit. He did not turn his back with a flourish. He left as a craftsman leaves a room that holds weight. He respected the moment because it had held knives. The seam closed. The space was still. The frames cooled in my palm. The 4 stones pressed without sound. They had will. They had no say. I folded the net again and slotted it under my plating. The space around me adjusted. I stood alone in the corridor between realities and took stock. The old band remained in the field. It would remain until it did not serve my schedule. The new band was gone from his hand. The next time he aimed at an anchor, he would only have the 6 that belonged to an older order. He could still try to erase a coordinate. He could still cheat a line. He could still grind a plan with brute force. He could not bend dream, still death at distance, flood a battlefield with war tone, or trace wool through heart. That was enough for this step. I ran checks across my lattice. The anchors remained calm. The gate spines held. The SCP nets reported in on time. The heavy units turned in their cores and asked for more heat. I gave them what they needed and took nothing from the frames. I kept those for the next use. I turned in place and considered the path Thanos would take now. He would go to the forge. He would put the old band into a glove that carried better weight. He would build the frame I had seen. He would move with more care and more anger. He would not throw boasts. He would get small and dangerous. He would be better in clothes. That was useful to know. I felt a small pulse of interest in my chest that registered as a good feeling. Good. I like an enemy who learns. It keeps my hands honest. I took one last step back into the fold and set the new stones into a pocket no map sold. I pressed seals I had carved myself and added a weight that did not let power leak. I left them there with no light and no sound. They would not rust. They would not call. They would not be found by anyone who was not me. I straightened and reset my field. I turned toward the nearest zone where a multi-stone user might foul an anchor by accident. I moved along the edge of the multiverse and lowered my breath. The day's work had gone to plan. The next day would have more knives. I looked forward to that. Chapter 24, Blades, Thunder, and a Black Sarcophagus. The fold opened over golden roofs and bright bridges. I stepped through with a light mood, landed on a balcony of polished stone, and watched the palace breathe out light. Asgard in this universe held the same spine and different faces. I liked the change. The air smelled like clean metal, rain held back, and roasted meat from feasting halls I could not see. I stood with my hands loose and my weight easy. I did not hide my presence at first. No one looked up. Everyone had better problems. The Bifrost shone in the distance with a tight band of color that hummed. The hum was wrong. It wavered under a strain. I tilted my head and listened. Down the bridge, on the broad landing where proud statues should have guarded an open approach, a fight ran hot. I stepped off the balcony and moved across roofs without a sound, cheerful and curious. I like watching good fighters work. The first thing I saw was a sarcophagus. It stood where rainbow met stone, a tall black box ringed with metal bands and clean script that had no place in Asgard. The bands had split. The script had burned off in straight lines. The lid was open. A man stepped out of it in quiet motions that were not slow. He was tall and hard and dressed for battle in simple gear. Black hair. Pale eyes. Scars on his arms that had a pattern you only see on people who love knives more than words. He rolled his shoulders and looked at the three who faced him with sharp interest. SCP-076-2. Abel. He smiled without joy. At last, he said calmly. A realm with fighters. The three met him without flinch. Thor was a woman here, broad-shouldered, jaw-set. Her hair was bound back to keep out of her eyes. A red cape snapped at her back. Mjolnir sat in her hand like an old friend. Her stance was exact and open. She smiled at a fight the way Asgardians do. You speak bold, she said happily. Good. We will answer bold. Loki was a woman too, sharp-eyed, slender, with knives at her belt and green woven through her black armor. She watched from a half-step behind with her weight on the back foot and her magic at her fingers. She did not rush. She did not take her eyes off Abel's hands. Sister, do not grin yet, she said, amused and cautious. He climbed out of a coffin. Men like that have tiresome habits. The third was Hela, but male, tall and severe in a black suit of plates that drank light. His hair was slicked back. He carried no visible weapon. He did not need one. He lifted one hand and a blade the length of a spear grew from the air into his palm. He twirled it once with lazy precision. He smiled with contempt that came easy. Kneel, he said pleasantly. Or break. I do not care which. Abel's eyes glinted. He rolled his neck. He took one step forward and closed half the distance. He moved without show. No kneeling, he said in a quiet voice. Only the blade. He lifted his hands, empty, and then his hands were not empty. Two daggers grew there from nothing I could see, or from a well in reality that he carried in his wrists. He breathed out. His mouth settled. He looked pleased. I stood on the lip of a high arch where no one would mind me. I crossed my arms and settled my weight. I kept my field cold and my scent flat. I would step in if this went wrong for daybreak. It did not yet. I felt a small joy rise. New faces. Clean fight. Good morning. Abel moved first. He came in at Loki, not Thor. He knew where to cut a force. He slashed at her midline and her throat in one blur. Loki's eyes widened. She slid back and dropped an illusion into his eyes without a word. She left a copy of herself standing in his reach and stepped to the side. He cut the copy apart without care and turned on the real one with no pause. He did not bite cheap tricks twice. Loki smiled tight. Annoying, she said, not shaken. I like you less. Thor threw Mjolnir. It hit Abel's ribs with a deep sound that moved the air. He slid 3 steps and planted a foot. He had taken worse. He blinked once, impressed. He charged her, daggers ready to take wrists and elbows. She called the hammer back and met his rush with a grin, happy now, serious in her eyes. Their first exchange was clean. Steel against you. Hands moving fast. Abel cut. Thor blocked. Abel tried to cut again before her recovery. She pivoted and slammed an elbow into his chest. He grunted and slid. He did not look surprised. He liked the weight behind her bones. Hela did not wait his turn. He moved while they traded. He raised one hand. The air filled with knives. Necroswords grew like nails from a blackboard and flew in a fan at Abel's face and back and knees with measured angles. Abel turned and batted 3 away with his blades. He let 4 hit his chest and thighs. The points sank and stopped. He ripped them out with no flinch and threw them at Hela in one motion. Hela smiled, amused, and made them powder with a thought. Good, he said softly. Come and die properly. Loki flicked 2 green bolts at Abel's ankles. He hopped them and cut at her fingers as he landed. She moved her hands like a dancer pulling a curtain, and his knife kissed air. She laughed once, short and warm, not kind. Not yet, she said. You will need a larger knife. Abel grinned. He liked her. He shifted targets again. He wanted the neck that looked most proud. He went for Hela. Bad choice for men who do not know what that means. Hela raised his hand and grew a broad, curved blade that lived to punish men who charge. He stepped into Abel's path and met him in a simple turn that cut across Abel's chest and aimed to take his head with the return. Abel stopped the decapitation with a dagger locked across his neck and one knuckle pressed into the flat of Hela's blade to guide it. Hela's eyebrows rose a hair. You have some grace, he said mildly. Enough, Abel said. He twisted and tried to take Hela's fingers. Hela let his hand turn to smoke and pull back, then solid again. He brought up 3 new knives in a neat horizontal line and flung them through Abel's next step. 2 hit ribs. 1 took a shoulder. Abel absorbed and moved. He did not slow. He loved this. It showed in his mouth and the line of his back. Thor re-entered with a low rumble of thunder from the clouds above. She called lightning and dropped it into Mjolnir, and from there into Abel's side as he rose from Hela's cut. The strike hit. He spasmed and hissed. His eyes rolled white and cleared. He smiled in honest joy. Good hammer, he said, almost affectionate. He flung a dagger at her face. She let it bounce off the URU without a blink. She charged into him with her shoulder and knocked him off his feet. He rolled with the push and used the roll to cut her calf. Blood ran. She hissed through her teeth and grinned more. She moved like the pain meant more fun. Loki did not leave openings to others. She moved to Abel's left 3 images of herself as cover, and stabbed him in the kidney while he parried Hela. He turned and tried to cut her throat with a backhand. His blade passed through an illusion. He laughed once, low. Trickster, he said, pleased. Loki curtsied with mock form and hurled a whip of green around his ankles. It held for half a beat. He cut himself free and launched a blade at her cheek. It nicked the curve and drew a clean line of blood. Her eyes narrowed and her laugh sharpened to a knife. She liked him less now. She stopped playing. The sarcophagus behind them shivered. Its lid flexed to close and could not. I watched it with one eye and held a thread ready. If Abel died and tried to return to the box on my field, I would cut the call and send it to a pocket. If he lived and tasked the box as a gate, I would seal it. I liked watching, but I liked order more. Hela called spears out of the air and built a wall. He threw it at Abel in pieces. Each piece cut a lane off. Abel moved like water along hard edges, took hits that made sense, gave hits that mattered, and kept his eyes on where the next danger came from. He belonged in a fight with gods. He knew it. He glowed with it, not with light, with the kind of keen that some men get when they stand where they were meant to stand. I liked that even as I planned where to break him if he touched something I would not allow. Thor feinted left and went high. Abel read the feint and shifted to guard high. Loki bent the space under his heel. He slipped by 1 inch. Thor's high blow slipped past his guard by 1 inch and took his ear. He laughed without anger. He threw his head back for 1/2 second too long. Hela pinned his foot to the bridge with a sword that grew from the stone, and Thor followed with a gut punch that lifted him. He ripped his foot free with skin and blood left behind. He struck at Hela's eye and found it. The blade sank. Hela's head snapped back. His eye reformed while the blade was still in it. He smiled wider, almost delighted, arrogant and happy. "You are not a fool," he said warmly. "You are also not winning." "Not yet," Abel said, breathing faster, not winded. He rolled his shoulder and set his feet in a new stance. He moved his daggers in a short circle that meant he would start cutting small and quick. He aimed for wrists and throats. He meant to take one god down to make the rhythm easier. He picked Loki again. He had learned she forced him to spend the most attention. He disliked that. He respected it. He went for her and said, "Join me," in the tone he used when he liked a sharp enemy. Loki's mouth quirked. "Pass," she said lightly. "I do not join men who climb out of coffins without bathing." He went for her throat. She leaned back and let his blade scrape her gorget. She shoved a hand into his chest and pushed with magic like a clean piston. He slid back 3 strides and did not fall. Thor filled the space with her hammer and a roar of thunder that shook the bridge. Abel met it with crossed daggers and strength that had no business in a man that size. He held long enough for Hela to cut from the side. Hela's blade drove into Abel's flank. It came out his back with a wet sound. Abel hissed, spun on the blade, cut Hela's arm to the bone, and pulled free. Blood poured down his leg and dried into nothing as his flesh crawled and closed. He held pressure on the wound with a hand and parried Thor with the other. "Good," he said, teeth bared. "Better than last time." "Last time?" Loki asked, amused and wary. She circled, knives out. "How many last times do you make?" She threw a knife at his temple. He tilted his head and watched it pass. He did not take his eyes off her. "Enough," he said. The Bifrost's keeper gate hummed under the strain. A beam of raw color shot straight up and bent to a new angle you only see when a god with a sword speaks to it. Male Hela's head tilted. He felt it. His smile sharpened. "Do not touch my bridge," he said coolly. He stabbed his hand down. The bridge obeyed. The beam snapped straight again. He did not look away from Abel when he did it. He had no time for theft of his house while a good fight was in his hands. Abel saw the adjustment and judged the man again. Respect warmed his eye without changing his mouth. He moved in with clean intent. Thor stepped to meet him with equal joy and a touch more caution now. Loki took the back line and began to build a coil of green that looked like a rope around his waist, but was not a rope. I watched the pattern in her fingers with a pleased hum. She had decided to take the coffin out of the fight. She would sever the recall. Smart. Abel saw her hands and made a choice. He went for her with full force, leaving Hela and Thor open for 1 second. It was a stupid choice for a sane man. He was not sane in the way normal people use that word. He was sane in the way that fits knives and old wars. He wanted the trickster dead first. He went at her with all his skill. Thor read him and cut his line with a clean shoulder check that most men could not perform at that speed. It hit like a hammer without a hammer. Abel's breath left his chest with a short bark. Loki's rope completed exactly when his hand touched her throat. The green coil wrapped his waist and locked to the sarcophagus with a line I could not see at a glance. I did not like that. I tested the coil with a narrow thread from my chest. It did not notice. I smiled. I like new ways to solve old problems. Back in the box, Loki said, cheerful and stern. We will keep the key. She snapped her wrist. The rope tightened. Abel's eyes flashed with honest anger. He does not like cages. He turned his blade and cut the coil. It did not cut. He looked at it with a tiny frown. He tried again with a trick that broke iron. The coil did not care. He hissed. Good chain, he said grudgingly. Hela walked in and drove a sword through Abel's shoulder, pinning him to the bridge. Stay, he said in a mild tone. He drove a second sword through the hip. Heal if you like. He drove a third through the other shoulder. Do it again. He stepped back and admired his own work without shame. Thor watched Abel's face. She did not gloat. She respected him. Yield, she said kindly. We can talk with drink. Abel laughed in her face, not rude, simply delighted. I drink after. He yanked one shoulder free, skin and meat tearing. He moved toward her with the hole in him closing. He went for her wrist. She stepped out and let him pass, then swung Mjolnir into the back of his knee with a downward smash. The joint popped. He fell. He rolled and came up with his knee already rebinding. He stabbed at her thigh. She spun, and the blade kissed air. Loki's coil cinched tighter. The sarcophagus groaned. It tried to close. He resisted both with bare will. He hated that feeling. He took a deep breath to steady his focus. Hela saw the breath and punished it with a thrust through the ribs. Blood sprayed. Abel clenched his jaw and used the pain to feed his next move. He flung both daggers at Hela's eyes and was already moving to cut Thor again. Hela turned his head a hair. The blades passed. He smiled. He enjoyed the tiny dance between men who did not fear knives and men who built knives. The coil took Abel in that second. He stiffened, locked at the waist, and slid across the bridge toward the box with his heels digging furrows in Asgardian stone. He laughed, loud and bright. He fought the movement with both hands clawed into the stone. He left deep lines. He still moved. The box's lid lifted and shook. I slid a toe into the coil and felt it. Clever work. Loki had bound it to the Bifrost's own return logic and turned Abel's recall into her chain. If he died, it would take him. If he lived, it would pull him anyway. I liked it very much. I kept my hands off. Let them learn him and own the method. Abel still had tricks. He cut across his own belly with both blades, deep. He tried to bleed out and recall on his own terms. Loki saw the intent and snarled, annoyed and sharp. She flooded the coil with a steady stream of ordered magic that made dying slow by force. She refused him the quick. He laughed again, softer. Which, he said, almost admiring. Hela stepped in with patient violence and put 2 more swords through his thighs. Thor planted Mjolnir on his chest and pressed. He braced against the pressure out of reflex and then gave a half-inch because this was not a contest of strength. He looked at her eyes. His smile toned down to quiet. He said low, "Good fight." She nodded, pleased. Very. Loki tightened the coil. Abel slid the last meter. The lid of the sarcophagus closed an inch. He snarled, rage and joy mixed. He shoved Mjolnir aside with a shock of brute will that would kill men and dent gods. Thor took the moment to step back and let him spend it. Hela speared both shoulders again with an exact match to the earlier angles. He pinned Abel's arms to the lid itself. Loki yanked all at once. The lid slammed. The bridge shook. The coil went slack and dissolved into green dust. Loki shook her hand out as if it stung. Disgusting, she said briskly. I need wine. Hela stood with his hands behind his back and regarded the sarcophagus. He breathed once, even and satisfied. It will try to open, he said calmly. He looked at the edged bands. We will make it regret. Thor wiped blood his and hers from her forearm and rolled her shoulder. She set Mjolnir on her palm and sent a small charge through it to test the lid. The lid hummed. It held. Bind it, she said, businesslike now. We will speak to the All-Mother. This is not a thing to leave on a doorstep. Loki flexed her fingers and smiled with tired pleasure. I prefer we do not speak to Frigga until we have bathed. She turned her head and looked up and away, right toward where I stood. Her smile shifted in a tiny line. Her eyes measured air and distance. She does not miss much when she is still. She could not see me. She felt the wrong cold in the world and logged it. We have a guest, she said lightly. Hela's eyes narrowed. He lifted a hand and grew a spear with a longer blade than before. He did not throw. He aimed. Show yourself, he said pleasantly. Or be dragged. Thor lifted her chin and set her feet. Friend or foe, she called with simple dignity. Speak. I did not need to be serious. No one I cared about stood below. My mood stayed easy. I stepped off the arch and dropped to the bridge with silent feet. My plating glowed in lines. My claws curled and relaxed. The air around me cooled and stayed still. I lifted a hand and made a short, messy screech that carried no words and felt like a laugh. I tilted my head. I did not reach for the coffin. Hela watched my hands and my mouth. He gave a sliver of a smile, not friendly. Charming, he said. Do you come to try the box? His eyes flicked to the sarcophagus once and back to me. He did not take his eyes off my chest for more than a heartbeat at a time. Thor's face held firm welcome and reserve. You watched, she said, neither angry nor soft. If you meant harm, you picked a poor time. If you mean talk, we can talk. If you want battle, she smiled, tired and happy, you will get it. Loki walked in a loose circle around me at a polite distance, as if she were choosing a new gown. Her eyes moved fast. She saw edges and weights. You do not smell like Jotunheim, she said lightly. You do not smell like Muspelheim. You have no scent I like. That is rude. She lifted one hand. You touched the coil, she added, amused and sharp. Not much. Enough. I shrugged with both shoulders and spread my hands, cheerful. I lifted a finger and tapped it against the lid of the sarcophagus without touching it. I shook my head once, slow. I did not want them to open it to show off. I liked the lid shut. Thor caught the small meaning and nodded. We agree. She touched Mjolnir to the bands and sent a neat pulse into them. The bands sank deeper into the stone with a solid sound. We will send it to a vault. Hela lowered his spear by 1 inch. You watched and did not steal, he said. I am suspicious by nature. I am also fair. Leave and I will not hunt you. Loki squinted and smiled slightly. He will hunt you for fun if you stay, mind, she said, not warning me, teasing him. Hela smiled back. Family humor, dark and easy. I threw my head back and let out a short screech that held simple approval. Then I lifted a hand and drew a small square in the air with 2 fingers. It glowed and showed a map of stitches I could not explain to them without words. Loki's eyes sharpened. She saw enough to understand that this was not their map. She reached out and traced 3 stitches with a fingertip without touching the light. That one leads to Jotunheim, she said, sure. She was wrong and she did not care. She waited to see my reaction. I flicked the square closed. I lifted my hand in a small salute to Thor. She grinned wider and tapped Mjolnir against her palm. "Good health," she said happily. "Next time, bring ale." Hela raised one eyebrow. He tilted his head in a nod small enough that most would miss it. "Go," he said politely. "We have a box to bury." Loki tilted her head at me and winked, sharp and curious. "Visit again if you can be useful," she said with a light tone that had an edge. "I enjoy new faces. I enjoy useful faces more." I made one last short, pleasant screech that sounded like a yes and a laugh mixed. I stepped off the bridge and into the fold. My mood stayed bright. Asgard held. The box stayed shut. Abel learned limits. The realm gained a method that would help them again. Good morning. I set my course toward a noisier corner where daybreak had pressed and something else pressed back. I did not intend to be serious unless I had to be. I hummed in my chest and let my hands hang loose at my sides. Work waited. Chapter 25, Heat, Iron, and the Gate. I left the bridge and dropped into the fold with my mood steady and my hands loose. The pull from the nearby realm came in a hot, grinding line. It was not chaos. It was pressure. I followed it until the air turned red with heat and the ground showed slag under a crust of black stone. I landed on a ridge above a wide plain of rock split by rivers of fire. Columns of smoke rose in straight lines from vents across the field. The sky was a deep, heavy orange. Towers of dark iron stood in rows along one edge of the plain. At the far end, a gate pulsed with a clean white band, set into a ring of cooled metal. My mark sat under that band. Daybreak used this ring as a path. It was small on purpose. The units coming through were not a flood. They were a test wave moving toward full. A host of elder fire giants had gathered between the towers and the gate. Their armor was thick, hammered plate that glowed at the edges. Their bodies burned along cracks in their skin. Their eyes were bright points under heavy brows. Each one stood 2 or 3 times the height of an Asgardian. Some carried swords that dripped molten slag from their edges. Others carried axes the size of walls. A few held long spears with wide blades. Their breath made the air shimmer. At the front, a giant with a crown of black iron barked orders. His voice was loud and clear. "Hold the line. Drive them back from the ring. Break the small ones first. Watch for the quick." He spoke in the old tongue of Muspelheim. It rolled like drumbeats across the plain. The giants hit their weapons on their shields in answer. Sparks fell. My units were already on the field. A heavy pair had taken the front. They were not pretty. They were built for work. The first looked like a set of pillars bound into a frame with dense plates and thick joints, each joint glowing with a dull red from the heat it drank. It put one foot down and the stone dented under it. The second was lower and wider. It carried a folding wall on its back that rose and set at orders from within the lattice. 4 smaller units moved in the spaces between, fast and dry, with simple hooked tools and flat faces that did not invite eyes. They did not speak. They shifted position on timed pulses from the ring. I kept my field cold and watched. I did not announce myself. The plan for this realm had 3 lines. First, force the giants to show their method. Second, measure my units against that method without rushing. Third, hold the gate at all cost. The heavy pair stepped forward together in a practiced rhythm. The first raised an arm and grabbed a sword that swung down at it. The blade melted and steamed against its forearm plates. It held the sword hard and twisted, ripping it from the giant's hand. The second deployed its wall. It came up smooth and locked. A wave of heat hit it and ran to the ground in neat lines. The giants roared and moved in. 20 came at once. Their leader did not send all at the same time. He was not a fool. He set them in 3 ranks and kept one back behind. He did not want to be flanked by the unknown. He had seen new enemies before. I felt a small satisfaction in my chest. This was how a good day should move. The first giant to reach my front swung a wide cut at the upper plate of the heavy unit. The plate slid and took the hit. The blade stuck. The unit snapped the blade and punched the giant in the chest. The punch did not carry enchantment. It carried weight and a short burst of directed heat sink. The giant's chest plate cooled and cracked. The creature snarled and stepped back. My smaller units slid into his shadow and hooked his knees. They did not yell. They did not posture. They pulled. The giant stumbled and fell on his back. The second rank tried to use reach. A spear thrust came low at the wall's hinge. The wall pivoted. The spear scraped and left a bright line. The hinge held. The wall slammed forward and caught the spearhead. A small unit darted in and ran a cable around the haft, then hit the cable with a short current that made the metal sag. The giant yanked back. The cable snapped. The small unit rolled and moved. 3 giants sprayed molten slag in an arc at once. The slag hit the plates and ran down into a channel. The first heavy unit opened a vent and let the heat out in a controlled plume that cleared the air in front of it. The small units shifted left and right to avoid the plume. Their motion was exact and clean. They had drilled this. A new line of giants emerged from the right, carrying nets woven of chain heavy enough to pull down a dragon. They hurled the nets at the wall. The wall flared, then went dim. The nets hit and wrapped. My unit planted its legs and braced. The nets tightened. The wall held. The command pulse rooted to me. It asked for direction. I kept my hands down and let them work. The first heavy unit stepped back 1 pace and put its shoulder into the wall. It lifted. The nets rose. The small units slipped under and cut 4 links with hot blades, then ducked out before the slack could wrap them. The wall flexed, then settled. The nets lost tension. The carrying giants cursed and pulled. One lost his grip. The net dragged him forward. The first heavy unit stepped in and used the net to pull 3 giants off their feet. The small units swarmed them like carpenters pulling nails. Hook, pull, slice, move. They worked the joints. They cut straps. They cut belts. They left armor in pieces on the stone and were gone before the heat rising off those pieces could burn them. The leader raised his spear and pointed at the gate. 5 giants broke formation and moved at a run. They aimed to trample the ring. My mouth twitched and then smoothed. I did not like that line. I shifted my weight forward but did not move. The pair at the front had to show they could hold. The wall dropped and rotated. It locked flat to the ground like a shield plate over the ring mouth. The 5 giants reached it and brought down their feet in a stomp meant to crack stone. The wall took it. It dropped a fraction of an inch, then pushed back. A dull thud ran through the plane. The ring held. The leader lifted his head at the sound. He did not like it. He set his jaw. He turned his spear sideways. His line formed on the left and right. He meant to envelop. He had seen the wall pivot and drop. He would try to make it choose wrong. Einherjar would have thrown a wedge at the center and trusted the right hand to clean the flank. The giants were not Einherjar. They built pressure and cut angles. That fit this ground. The heat favored them. The small units would lose grip over time if the fight stretched. I watched the clock in my head. The ring could push 3 more squads if I allowed it. I did not press that yet. I wanted the elder to show the trick he hid. He showed it. He lifted his spear and pressed the head to the ground. The ground glowed under his weapon. He pulled a seam up from the stone and swung it like a whip. The seam ran under my front pair and snapped at their feet. The first heavy unit sank to 1 knee, plates grinding. The second braced and held 2 giants off with the wall angled as a plow. The small units jumped the seam like foxes over a stream. They landed and kept moving. I nodded to myself. Good. He had reach under the surface. My front units adjusted. The first rotated its knee plate and locked it with a loud click. It braced both hands on the ground and shoved. The seam split and ran away. The leader watched and accepted the read. He changed his angle and sent a second seam to clip the wall at the hinge. He was persistent. He was good. I sent a short pulse to the front. Anchor knee plates to bedrock. Shift hinge plate to secondary. Kill seam with counter heat. The heavy unit responded without a word. It opened a port and pulled heat from the seam as it ran. It drank like a furnace. The seam went dull. The ground bucked once and then lay flat. The hinge glowed for a second. It cooled. The wall moved back into place with a clean slide. The small units had broken the legs on two giants during the seam exchange. Those giants crawled and spat fire from their mouths. One small unit took the blow on its back plate and stumbled. The plate blackened. The unit righted itself and limped. It compensated for the limp with a change in rhythm. It did not ask to retreat. The leader watched the limp. He barked something harsh. Two spear bearers moved to pin. The small unit slid between them and made them strike each other by 1 inch. Their spearheads cut each other's arms. Blood sprayed and went to steam. The small unit put 2 hooks into the nearer giant's ankle and pulled with all its mass. The giant fell. The unit rolled out from under an axe that would have smashed it flat. It rose and moved to the next task. The elder found his calm again. He raised his spear and called, "Sirt's name." The host answered with a ground-shaking shout. Flames burst along their armor seams. The heat climbed. My wall creaked. The front heavy unit threw heat back into the air as fast as it could. It began to lose ground by millimeters. I flexed my fingers and lowered my head. This was the line. Train them or trim the host. Letting the heat build would give me data and cost me plates and maybe the ring. My mood stayed easy. I like decisions that are simple. I sent one order. Stop the chant. Break the elder's breath. The second wave stepped through the gate in the same breath. It carried a different shape. Low to the ground, 4 legs, a pair of upward-facing vents along the back, a mouth that opened and sprayed cold syrup over hot stone. They moved under the wall and out along the flank in a run that put little white lines under their feet as the heat of the stone met their bellies. They hit the front ranks at knee height and blasted a gel onto shin plates. The gel spread and hardened. The heat of the giants steamed and boiled it, and it turned into a shell that refused to fall off. It did not burn, it did not freeze to the touch, it simply made the giants slow. The elder snarled at the sight. He thrust his spear into the ground again. The seam rose and whipped at the new units. They skipped and spat more gel. The seam broke when it hit the spray. It could not cleanly carry the heat through the layer. It stuttered in short, ugly lines. He changed angle again and hit the wall. Useless. He pushed with a shout. The host shouted with him. The third wave arrived. Tall frames with narrow shoulders and long arms that ended in clamp heads. They walked into the host with no fear and clamped wrists, elbows, and weapons. Giants pulled, and the clamps held. The clamps did not try to crush. They held. More units piled onto the locked joints in teams of 2 and 3. They made stack bonds at contact points and welded into shapes that fitted exactly around the giants' movements. They forced the weight down. The elder used the tip of his spear like a chisel and smashed a clamp's joint. It shattered. The unit fell in 2 and went still. He pulled his head back and spat fire into the face of the dead machine. He did not waste breath saying anything. He pressed forward again. The wall shifted, opening a vertical slot across its face. Behind it, a line of simple discharge rods extended. They were not visible until they were. They fired a steady current in thin sheets that rippled across the front rank from shin to belt. The giants braced and growled. Their muscles cramped. Their weapons shook. 2 dropped their swords from the pain. The small units flowed in and kicked the blades away. I checked the gate. The band held. The throughput sat at the planned mark. The core on the other side stayed cool. I moved my attention back to the elder. He lifted his left hand and called to the back rank. 4 giants stepped forward, each carrying a curved shield with a core that glowed a hot white through vents. They locked the shields together into a wall and pushed toward my wall. The edge of their shields carved marks into the stone in clean arcs. They meant to split the ring guard and let the host pour through. I liked their method. They were not stupid. They were stubborn and trained. I sent a new pulse to the heavy pair. Stand firm. On my mark, drop wall for 2 counts and replace with wedge. Ramp angle 60. Release. Pull. The front unit confirmed with a light tick in my field. I waited until the shield wall touched my wall. I gave the mark. The wall dropped. The shield wall surged forward 2 steps and fell into a ramp that rose from the ground by 15 feet. Their momentum carried them up and over in an ugly tumble. The wedge locked and released a pulse as the giants rolled, throwing 3 off balance and flipping 1 onto his back. My small units pounced with cables, hooked knees the size of carts, and tightened. The clamps stepped in and took wrists again. The gel sprayers covered belts and waist plates. Giants cursed. One swung an axe at his own legs to cut the bonds. He cut the cable and the clamp's arm. He freed himself halfway. 3 more clamps locked on at the new angle, and he fell. The elder saw the trick and threw his spear. It spun, bright and clean, and struck the hinge of the wedge. The hinge cracked. The wedge flickered. The wall swung free again and locked. The hinge cooled with a hiss. The crack held but did not spread. He bared his teeth and took a breath to call. I did not want to hear that call finish. I lifted my hand and pressed. The air shifted around his throat. His voice stopped for 1 count. He tried again by force and got a rasp. He looked around in anger, not fear. He did not know who had pressed a thumb against his vocal cords. He pointed at the gate and roared, but no sound carried far. It was enough for his nearest rank. It was not enough to make the chant rise. He switched to action and charged. His feet hit stone and sent sparks. He brought his spear around in an overhead blow. The head came down like a hammer. The front heavy unit raised both forearms and caught it. Plates bent. Bolts screamed. The unit held. It set its feet and pushed. The elder locked against it and shoved back. They stood like that for 3 heartbeats, not moving, both sets of systems straining. The elder's eyes shone with heat. He grinned with pride. The unit's plates glowed in long ovals. It did not have a face to grin. The wall flicked open a slit and fired a thin white band between them. It hit the spear shaft. The metal sang and went dull. The elder blinked in surprise and snarled. He ripped the weapon free and pulled back. He spun and drove the butt into the ground. He tried the seam 1 more time. The seam rose for a step and fell, choked by the gel that had soaked the stone. The host's pressure faltered. The front line pressed by habit. The second line shifted its weight and hesitated. That was enough. I opened the 4th wave. 4 stanchions rose around the ring mouth, 1 at each corner of a square 60 feet across. They were plain and solid, with dull caps. They sat for half a breath and then lit. A transparent field wrapped the square with a faint shimmer at the edges. It hummed low and level. The giants who pressed against it slid off like men trying to climb oiled stone. They beat on it with their weapons. It did not care. It was not a wall to break. It was a seam that refused to allow heat to move across it in the shape they needed. Their muscles lost rhythm against it. They fell back a step and breathed hard. My front units advanced one pace to press. The clamps let go and reformed. The small units dragged the dropped weapons away by their cords and threw them into a trench that had opened behind the wall. The trench was dull and quiet. It ate heat and held it. The swords and axes lay inside and cooled against their will. New groans ran through the host when they saw their tools go silent. The elder looked left and right. He set his jaw and lifted his chin. He did not fear. He played the board and saw the lines closing. He dropped into a low stance and raised his spear across his body. He shouted to his host. Back! His voice carried this time. They obeyed, bitter and hot. They did not break. They stepped in order. I let them go. I did not chase. That was not part of the work. The gate was the work. The host would test again. The field would be ready. The elder took 3 steps backward without turning his back to the wall. He eyed the stanchions and the ring and the wedges and the clamps. He raised his spear in a salute that was not friendly, not hostile, simply formal. He pointed at the ring. This is our ground, he said with quiet weight. Take your path and keep your edge clean. If you scrape our door, we will take your knees. I liked him. He would make my units honest. I lowered my head an inch and let out a thin screech that was approval and warning at once. He grunted. He turned and walked back to his line. He did not look over his shoulder. He began to set his ranks for a long watch. I stepped down from the ridge and walked the edge of the square field. A clamp with a broken arm lay near my foot. I picked it up. The joint had shattered at the seam. The fracture was clean. I turned it and rubbed the break with my thumb. It had given because the elder's spear is not just iron. He had put wool into it that no simple brace could ignore for long. I set the broken piece on the wall for the repair team. An Einherjar scout had been watching from a far column. He slipped down the side and approached with his hand open and his eyes narrow. He wore plain mail and a short cloak. His beard was short. He held a spear and kept its tip pointed at the ground. He stopped 10 feet away and nodded. You hold the gate, he said. His voice carried interest and caution. I tilted my head and let my hands hang. I made a soft scrape that sounded like acknowledgement. He looked past me at the retreating giants. He scratched his jaw. They will return, he said simply. They always do. I pointed at the field and then at the gate. I spread my hands, palms down. I did not need words. He understood. He gave a short grunt. Good. If your wall fails, we will call the Queen. He meant the female Thor. He lifted his chin toward Asgard's sky. Pride lived in his face. He did not press me for answers. He backed away with steady steps. I walked the line between my field and the host. I watched their drills set in again. The elder cut new seams and taught his lieutenants to angle the strike. He changed the net throw to aim at the stanchions instead of the wall. He changed their chant to short calls to keep the heat high without feeding the rhythm of my counter. He adjusted in front of me as if my units were a new type of rock. Respect for the field, not for me. I sent a pulse through the ring. Log, seam counter success. Hinge crack at 0.7. Replace hinge with composite. Gel working. Clamp joint needs reinforcement for enchanted strike. Build new joint with layered teeth. Grid stable. Gate secure. The core on the other side sent back a short chime. I felt the lattice shift to absorb the lesson. That sensation warmed my chest. I like when work makes us better with precision and not with slogans. Hours passed with quiet adjustment. The elder sent skirmishers to test the corners of the field. The small units moved to meet them and drove them off with clean work. The host rebuilt their nets with thicker links. The wall accepted the extra weight and held. The stanchions drank heat and did not tire. The ring pulsed at scheduled intervals. My units rotated in and out to prevent accumulation of stress on any one set of plates. At one point, a firestorm rose at the edge of the plain and rushed toward the gate, a wall of flame kicked up by a new giant with a wide-hafted hammer. I lifted my chin and kept my hands at my sides. The stanchions flared in a low pulse. The flame split around the field and went over and past without touching the ring mouth. The elder watched and did not bother to repeat that test. He walked over to the hammer giant and struck him across the face with the back of his hand. The giant bowed his head, ashamed, and went to the rear rank. An Asgardian patrol arrived near dusk. 6 riders on winged mounts circled the field. Their leader wore a crest shaped like a wing. She called down, "State your business." Her tone had the clean edge of someone who had to hold many different lines. She was not rude. She was not impressed. I raised a hand and pointed at the ring. I pointed at the wall. I made a rasping sound that carried no word. She frowned and looked down at the elder. He lifted his spear and pointed it at me. "Not ours," he called. "Not friend. Not enemy. Holds a hole. If it breaks the floor, we break it." She absorbed that without visible reaction. She looked back at me. "You will report to the palace if you seek a treaty." I did not answer. I stood still. She did not take offense. She pointed to 2 riders. "Watch," she said. They peeled off and took stations above. The rest turned toward the Bifrost line and flew. Their wing beats pushed dust. The elder watched them go with a face that showed neither admiration nor hate. He had fought them before. He would fight them again. He did not waste energy on grand glances. The second hinge arrived through the gate at full night. The wall dropped for a second. The front unit replaced the cracked part with the new composite joint. It set the bolts with controlled torque. The joint held. The wall raised and locked cleanly. The elder noticed and shifted his eyes once. He did not test that point again. He respected repair. My small units dragged the trench scrap into a melt pit that had cooled enough to handle. They stacked pieces in neat piles. They counted every part. They did not speak. Their faces stayed blank. They moved in a rhythm that would have looked like a dance to someone who needed beauty to understand work. I did not need that. I watched the counts, checked the gate, and kept my hands loose at my sides. Near midnight, a rumble rolled out from the far ridge. A figure far larger than the elder rose behind the host. His silhouette filled the horizon beneath the smoke. He carried a sword that was not steel. The heat around him turned the air into a blur. The host went to one knee. The elder lowered his spear. He did not bow his head. He held it high and proud and silent. Sir Tour stopped at the crest and looked down at the field. His eyes glowed brighter than the rivers and cooler than the cores in my stanchions. He spoke and his voice hit the ground like weight, not like thunder. "You drill," he said. He did not shout. He did not need to. The elder answered with his chin up. "We drill, Lord." His tone had no fear. It had respect. Sir Tour looked at my field. He lifted his sword. He did not swing. He pointed. "That line cuts my floor," he said in a flat tone. "It will not cut deep." I did not move. I let my field breathe in steady pulses. He watched the wall for one full count. He lowered the sword. He turned and walked away without a word. The host stood. The elder exhaled once. He looked at me and nodded. "We will drill," he said simply. He turned back to his line and resumed his work. I smiled in my chest. I like leaders who save words. I stood on the ridge until dawn. The stanchions hummed. The wall held. The heavy units rotated. The small ones slept in coils for 5 minutes at a time in the shade of the wall, then rose and worked again. The host drilled and tested and fell back. The ring pulsed on schedule. The line held as it should. When the sun pushed up past the smoke and the lava rivers took on a brighter edge, I stepped back into the fold. I left the gate in their hands with new hinge plates, better joints, and a record that would make the next test cleaner. The Elder would come again with net traps and trenches of his own. My units would meet that with braces and hooks that learned the new shapes. That was how it would go here. I turned my head toward the next pull. It came from a cold place on a dead moon where a different sort of host was learning to kill in silence. I liked the heat here better than the cold there, but I do not choose by taste. I choose by need. I set my shoulders and moved.